Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for NHS Devon's Integrated Care Board meeting. This is a meeting being held in public, so you're very welcome to be joining us. I'd particularly also like to welcome Sarah Greep, who joins us today to talk about her experiences of dental services later on, and also to Dame Sian Morgan, who is Chief Executive of the Royal Devon University's Hospitals. Thank you very much to both of you, and great to be joined in person as well by Kate Shields. So thank you very much. We have some apologies for absence. We have Simon Tapley and Joe Tull, thank you very much for deputising. Tracy Lee sends her apologies, as does Steve Brown, and we're very grateful to Ruth Harrell for deputising on behalf of Steve. So welcome everyone. Could I just confirm that the meeting's correct? Yes, that's great. And later today we'll also be having a private meeting, and that will be discussing during that time our SOF 4 exit criteria. That's our system oversight framework exit criteria, because NHS Devon is in the highest level of oversight. And we'll also be discussing our digital strategy, our transformation programme, specialised commissioning, and also the CQC's requirements for integrated care boards. But I'd just like to assure you that all these issues will return to a public meeting for full discussion at a later date. Could I just ask members to confirm whether they have any conflicts of interest that they'd like to update on the public register, or anything they'd like to note that's particularly relevant to items under discussion today? Thank you, Sheena.
Yes, I sit on the Covell Center board, so would presume that I can't vote if a decision requires a vote on that item.
Thank you very much, Sheena. Yes, I would like to confirm that you're very welcome. We hope that you'll take part in the discussions on that item, but that would mean that we would not be expecting you to vote if it came to a vote. So thank you very much for clarifying that. Yes, thank you. Darren Norcom.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So just to update, so I don't think my declaration of interest has been updated on here, not for a conflict today, but I'm now a governor of the Dartmoor Multi-Academy Trust, but also just to note that currently it says that I'm not a decision maker, which is incorrect.
Right, that's very important that we update that. Thank you very much for highlighting that, Darren. Now, the next item on the agenda is for us to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of February. Does anyone have anything that they would like to add or amend on that? Thank you very much, Kevin.
Thanks. It's just just to be clear, in point 14 on the minutes, which was the Audit and Risk Committee update, it's the bullet point which starts: the committee have been informed about the appointment of external auditors. And just to be clear, the timings, it would be better if it said timings of the annual accounts audit, just to be clear what we're talking about in timings, if that's possible.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Could we confirm that that will be updated, and then we can sign the minutes unless there are any other comments? Yes, thank you. Franco Kelly?
It's just the title of the partner members. We're down as representatives, and we're not. We're partner members, and I think it's quite important to make that distinction.
Thank you very much, Frank. So we will update that, and I can see that Paul wishes to come in. Paul Renshaw.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it was just to point out that the minutes say that the workforce strategy would be coming to the private session in March, when in fact we agreed it would come in April. So that just needs to be amended, please.
Thank you very much for that. Right. Any other comments? No. Bill.
Yes, sorry, I should have said this under the declarations. My declaration should have been updated. I've sent it through, but that was just to confirm that I've spoken at a number of conferences on a regular basis, just so that none of which involve any remuneration, but just for completeness.
Thank you very much, Bill. Right, we're going to come on to the part of our agenda around our citizens' voice, and this is a really particularly important item given that we will be taking on responsibility for dental commissioning. And so we're very grateful to Sarah Group for joining us today, and to Health Watch for highlighting the really important issues that are being raised with them around access to dental care and the implications for people. So I think what we're going to do now is hand over to you, Sarah, and if I could ask you to speak for up to 10 minutes, because we want to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions as well. So if I could ask you to unmute your microphone, and we're going to turn off all our microphones here so that we can hear your story, and thank you again for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity, because I do feel really strongly about what I'd experienced and how it differed from what I was used to all of my life and what I would expect to the service to be. And yeah, it was. It might seem small to some people that it was just a tooth and tooth pain, but the impact that tooth pain can have on every area of your life, it was just sort of unexpected, really. And I did want to highlight that situation so that I didn't have to experience it again in the future, and obviously everybody else, because I discovered that so many other people were in the same situation when I discovered how dire the situation was. And there wasn't much else I could do whilst I was suffering the pain, except for sit still most of the time. Manage my own environment and own outside temperature, inside temperature, to just try to keep the pain at bay as much as possible. And so obviously I rang all of the different helplines for dentistry, but also tried to do my own research, or just asking other people, what are you using, or what do you use when you have this kind of pain? And you know, some people on Facebook groups and some of my own friends and family would say, "Oh, use Oragel, that'll numb it for a little while," and others were saying, "Use a sensitive toothpaste, that'll numb it, that'll help you to be able to eat for a couple of minutes." And you know, I found that there were forums and Facebook groups where people were ordering products from abroad, like Thailand, for example, just trying to self-treat, tying strings to doors and pulling their own teeth out, etc. And because they were just waiting and just going around in circles when you're trying to get the help. So the 17th of January, I started getting pain. I sort of let it go on for a few days, thinking it might have just been a sensitivity. I tried to sort it out myself. But by the 20th, which I think was a Friday morning, I realised it wasn't going anywhere. It was getting worse. I didn't want it to carry on through the weekend. So I thought that I was going to be able to ring my dentist and get some help. But I'd been discharged from my dentist as an NHS patient because all of the dentists had left that surgery, and the only dentist left there was the owner, and she was only taking private patients. And I rang the local dental access centre, which has always been known to me as Seven Trees. And so that's what I referred to in some of the emails that I wrote, I think. And I was told that I would be put on a triage and I would be called back by 5 o'clock. But if I wasn't, I was given the out of hours number for the weekend. I mean, the pain was unbearable by then, and I still hadn't got the knack of how to sort of keep it at bay, and it just hurt even if I chewed on the other side, just the act of chewing, the temperature going into my mouth if I spoke, so I didn't want to speak to anybody. things like that. And yeah, I didn't get the call back. So I just tried to self-manage it that weekend and asking for help from other means. And then the early hours, I can't remember, to be honest now, I've written it down, but Sunday or Monday morning, it turned out it was just getting so worse that I couldn't lay down. If I laid down, that was when the horrendous pain would begin throughout my whole head. And I just had to sit up, and sitting up when you're extremely tired and not being able to go to sleep is horrible. My friend who lives here also said, look, I'm going to take you to A&E. So I had to sit in A&E then for 4 hours. I wouldn't have been able to sit there. I don't know what I would have done. I was going out of my mind. I just wanted to get away from myself. I just wanted to be injected with something to take the pain away, and somebody to say, look, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to sort it out for you, and for it to be over. But that isn't what happened. It went on in for 3 weeks. And that night in A&E, eventually I was seen by a doctor sort of about 4 hours later, who gave me some antibiotics and some morphine. So I kind of did get some relief until the next day. I started thinking, what am I going to do if I can't get any help? We were ringing around lots and lots of dentists. The NHS website said, has a list of dentists that you can call that supposedly have NHS vacancies. But everyone that we rang said that they didn't, so that wasn't up to date. The out of hours number, when you ring that, it tells you to ring Plymouth again. But if you ring Plymouth and it's out of hours, then it tells you to ring the emergency number. So then you have to think, all right, how am I going to get around this to actually speak to somebody? So there was another option that you could choose that wasn't clear, but then you were able to speak to somebody. But then it was too late because they were only in Plymouth for sort of limited hours at the weekend, that kind of thing. So you're trying to help yourself while you're in a lot of pain, trying to self-manage, and then hitting sort of brick walls, trying to find the missing jigsaw piece kind of thing. Just feeling at the mercy of the system and just completely sort of deflated, despondent, just thinking that, how has it come to this? And where do I go next? And then obviously the thoughts went to seeing somebody privately because of not being helped. I rang. I think what happened after the hospital, I was able to sleep, and then sort of managed to contact. I sent some emails to some private dentists to try to get an appointment at least if I wasn't going to be helped by the NHS. So I also sorry, I'm just going a little bit blank. I think it was the Tuesday then that I rang the Dental Access Centre again and was kind of scolded for not ringing the day before as well, and told that I'm going to the beginning of the list again. I didn't understand that whole system. I hadn't been told anything like that on Friday, that you have to ring every single day, otherwise you go back to the beginning of the list again. I asked more questions. The lady on the phone wasn't really very nice and didn't seem happy that I was asking questions, but I wanted to understand how it was working. She said, well, you're going to be in the list, you're going to be on the triage list with all the other hundreds of people that are on the list that are ringing in every day. And I asked, well, how long is it likely to be that I would actually be seen? She said, it's an average of 12 days. I said, so an average of 12, it could be more, could be less, but on average, people are being expected to suffer this kind of pain for that length of time. So it was how long is a piece of string. I couldn't be told, and I had to be told that I had to ring at 8:45 every morning, or get somebody to ring for me at least. I was penalised for not ringing on the Monday. I'm put to the beginning of the list again. So this is when, you know, I'm looking at, I'm in receipt of universal credit with a limited capacity for work. I'm allowed to do a small amount of permitted work should I get some. So I was trying to think, right, how can I get some money to pay for some dental treatment? Then I applied for the budgeting loan. So I was given the maximum amount of maximum budgeting loan from the universal credit, which is £348, to cover all of the additional expenses plus dentist treatment. So I had been given antibiotics by the hospital as well, which I was a bit reluctant to be on because I didn't actually know if I had an infection or not, but was really hopeful that it was an infection, so that at least then perhaps that would solve the problem. But it didn't seem to be. And I do get worried about having antibiotics when I don't need them, because I think that's going to take another 6 months to get my immunity back. And I seem to tend to get all sorts of other diseases and illnesses. So now I have to pay monthly back the budgeting loan, and I'm on less money. So I've got to try to replace that. I've bought probiotics to try to counter the antibiotics, because I was given another lot of antibiotics by a private dentist that I saw. She couldn't work out what was wrong. I eventually was seen by the Dental Access Centre. I prodded around for about 40 minutes, and she still couldn't say what tooth it was or what was wrong, and was trying to force me to say which tooth it was out of the second and third tooth. But there was pain in both, between both, so I couldn't categorically say. So she was in a position she couldn't just take a tooth out. But I was just sent home again for a following weekend with a phone call, to be given a phone call that Monday, which I had. And then when I said that it's still just as bad, they said I had to join that queue again, the beginning of the queue again, which seemed insane. I think this was over 2 weeks by then. In the meantime, I had seen a private dentist twice, who had also recommended, given me the other lot of antibiotics, recommended a hygienist to descale, although she said there wasn't much there. I thought that I had a lot of scale on this particular tooth. And when I had that done, which was horrendous, lots more injections, prodding around, I came home and looked in the mirror, well, took some photos with my phone, and that, what I thought was scale, was still there. So I did some research and discovered that it was exposed root. So it was highly sensitive, but none of the dentists that I'd seen, either the private one or the one at the Dental Access Centre, had explained that to me, and that there could have been a possibility of putting a skin graft over there, or other options. So I don't know, the suffering just went on for 3 weeks. There's lots and lots more detail that I could tell you of the amount of phone calls and how, you know, despondent, stressed, miserable I was. I couldn't see my son and grandchildren. I missed his birthday. You know, just lots of things like that. I've been asked to say how it affected me and how I felt. Just feeling that I had to solve this problem myself just seemed crazy. And yeah, I was miserable, and you know, I sort of got the knack of what I had to do. I had to have the heating on all the time to keep the temperature correct. So I knew that that was running up a bill that I wouldn't be able to afford. But I couldn't go outside in the cold, or just be outside in the cold all day. I didn't want to be around anyone or speak. The only way I was able to communicate with anyone was writing or using WhatsApp on my laptop to type, because I find it difficult on my phone. yeah, I just felt like I was a burden to anybody around me, and I didn't eat much. I couldn't eat or drink properly. It was just a miserable, dire situation to be in, that I just thought, you know, if I'm just sat still here, I had my laptop, so I did email to make some complaints. I made an official complaint. The email that came back was very thorough, but there was paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs of information about the whole procedure, and it was difficult to just pinpoint and extract what was actually required of me to do next. So I still haven't done it. But since then I was contacted by yourselves, so I thought, well, at least, you know, I've been typing things out and I'm having this conversation with you, and then maybe I'll get to the next stage if that's necessary with that official complaint. But Health Watch were good in taking it seriously, and I know, and I was told that wasn't going to make any difference to me getting help at the time, but I did want to help for the future. I still don't have a dentist. One of the dentists that were taking NHS clients was Dartmoor Dentist at Tavistock. My dad and stepmom and my sister are all registered there, and they live in Plymouth. They pay privately, but when I asked to join there, despite them having vacancies for NHS patients, they still said no because I lived in Plymouth. So that's another example of one of the kinds of kind of brick walls or anomalies, or, you know, contradictions, because it, you know, if we're free to go and choose whatever dentist we want, supposedly, if they've got spaces, they've still got to say yes to take us, even if we're out of area. And if the out of area doesn't exist for dentistry, as it does with doctors, according to NHS England, that's just a contradiction. So it was still, that was really upsetting. And I thought I put a lot of hope on that. Eventually, one of the other things that I decided to do was to ring the NHS number again to at least be put on a waiting list. And the lady said that the waiting list is 10 years long, but so do you still want to be on it? I said, well, I'd like to be on it in case something changes. And I explained the situation and what had happened, and I was really relieved that she wanted to help, that she wasn't just sort of sticking, well, maybe that was policy and procedure for her job, but I'd felt up until now, particularly through the other telephone lines and the access centre, that people were just sort of sticking to strict, this is how we're doing it, you know, and not particularly personable or seeing me as a person and sympathising or empathising. But this lady, she listened to what I said, and that I discovered that this wasn't tartar and that it was an exposed root, and that I feel that definitely probably is the tooth, even though pain was going to the next one. She was able to look up onto the records for the Dental Access Centre and say that, and see that what I'd said was true, and corroborated what I said, that I was called back and just left to my own devices again, and to keep calling every day, despite having already been seen. So she said about the pilot scheme, where some private dentists are helping alleviate this situation, and said that although there wasn't any available appointments for any dentists in Plymouth, I'm not sure if there are any dentists in Plymouth that are part of the scheme, but she said that I could go to either Salcombe or Torquay, and Salcombe would be another week away or something, and Torquay would be the soonest, which was in a few days' time. So I'd have to get through another weekend. And so I was just really hopeful and relieved, felt there was some light at the end of the tunnel. And I was told all of the information about the dental surgery, May House surgery, and she sent me the information, and the surgery contacted me. I gave them what they needed. It was all straightforward. And yes, I had to travel. I had to be driven. I wouldn't have been able to go there myself without assistance that early in the morning, or drive that far. I would have had to go the night before, but luckily I was able to be driven. Again, that was another expense, but felt that it was worth it, even if I had to sell something. And I've had the first part of root canal treatment rather than any kind of skin graft. So the root was taken out so that I don't have any feeling there. I don't know what the second half is, but I was told to ring back in 2 weeks, which I did. And I said it seemed okay, but I hadn't been eating on it. And yeah, I felt elated afterwards. I was told that the codeine that I was being given would help with the pain, which would be excruciating after the treatment. So I was really scared. I thought it's been bad enough for 3 weeks. I can't, well, what on earth is it going to be like? But it was nothing on the scale. It was sort of like 5% of the pain of what and suffering that I had for that 3 weeks. So I was very happy about that and was able to start to get my life back to normal. But the following week, when I've started to actually eat on it, it does cause me some problems. But again, nothing on the scale of what it was. So I have contacted them and have another appointment, but that's another week or so away. But it's not affecting me badly at the moment. The other tooth that I have a problem with was I've got half a tooth where it cracked, and I had it filled twice temporarily during COVID times when I was still with my dentist, and they hadn't told me that I'd been discharged. They just said that they would contact me after COVID when they were able to bring me back in to complete the treatment. So I still have half a tooth also, and nowhere to go to have it done again unless I pay privately. It's not painful enough. It is sensitive if I drink or eat on it. But it's not bad enough for me to contact the Dental Access Centre. I have to be in excruciating pain and then made to suffer for a few weeks, it seems, to have that seen to.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much for setting this out so clearly. And on behalf of all of us, I'd just like to thank you for sharing such a powerful story and to say how sorry I am that you suffered so much and experienced such traumatic confusion around how to seek the help that you needed. There has undoubtedly been a major change in people's experience of access to the dental services that they would expect, and no one could have set it out more starkly or clearly than you, including the very serious impact that this has had on your life. So I am really sorry to hear that. I'm really keen that members around the table and joining online of the board have a chance to ask you questions. So I'm just going to open this up to colleagues. Does anybody have anything that they would like to ask? Because I certainly have a question myself, if I may, Sarah. And one of the things that you've highlighted is that you've needed to take quite a lot of medication and been in serious pain during that time. And it's one of the issues that we sometimes find is that people then end up with other problems that they wouldn't have experienced had they had timely access to treatment. And it does concern me as well to hear that you've got ongoing problems with another tooth, but you've been told you have to wait till you've got severe pain before that can be dealt with. That's very, very worrying. So I guess that was more of a comment than a question, but perhaps one that we need to come back to when we have our discussions later. Unless there's anything you'd like to add about other problems that have arisen because you were waiting.
No, I sort of touched on obviously the financial, emotional,
Yes.
and just having to. No, I don't think so.
No, you have been very clear about that. Now, I can see that Sheena Asthana would like to come in, Sian Morgan, and also Judy Hargaden. So, Sheena, would you like to go first?
Thanks very much, Sarah. I thought that was a really, really appalling case study, and you described what you went through really, really well. I have comments rather than questions, but for me, I think that your experience really suggests that we need to take this as an ICB incredibly seriously. I see this as a health inequalities issue, and one that really should be flagged as a health inequalities issue. First of all, because your access to dental care has clearly been based on your ability to pay, and the kind of financial difficulties that you've got into, I think, is just absolutely unbelievable. And that directly contravenes the NHS principle of equal access for equal need. Now, because we treat dentistry slightly differently, we could make the argument that that doesn't apply. However, we know, and I'm not saying because I don't think you've got gum disease, but we know that there are associations between gum disease and risk of cardiovascular disease. And we should be taking this as a prevention issue, which is, again, links to the health inequalities agenda. So I think in two ways, we need to really prioritise dental care as something that should be at the heart of our commitment to addressing health inequalities. And I suppose my third comment, just for later on, is it just increases my reservations about taking on the kind of pod commissioning functions, because it's clearly not working and we're taking on a failing service, and it just worries me a lot. But thank you very much for your story. It was very powerful.
Thank you, Sheena. Sian.
Thanks. And Sarah, thank you so much for giving such a very vivid account of your experience. I think you really brought to life the problems that so many people are facing. And it's clear from what you said that severe dental pain just dominates your whole life trying to tackle it. That came out very, very strongly. So I would agree with everything that Sheena just said. Can I ask you a question? It might be too simplistic, I don't know. But if you could have changed one single thing in that process that would have made a big difference to you, could you identify one single thing?
It would have been being able to be seen on the day that I ran, when I ran the Dental Access Centre. It would have been being seen on that day, at the very latest the next day.
Okay, thank you. So it's about timing. Yep. Okay. Thanks very much indeed, Sarah.
Thank you. Judy.
Thank you very much. Mine is a comment too. I was powerfully moved by what you said of your experiences with people who were supposed to be helping you access treatment. And this idea that you have to keep ringing back, and if you don't, you go to the bottom of the queue, and all of that experience. So, like my colleagues, I'm really sorry it happened. Our chair mentioned earlier that we're going to be talking about dental services soon. It's a bit complicated, but they used to be organised by other people, and they're coming in our direction to organise from the 1st of April. So as a priority, I think that the messages you have given us will be the first item on our agenda as we take responsibility for this. So it's very timely you spoke to us, and I'm appalled you had such an experience. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tandy.
Yeah, really just offering my sorry as well. That was a really powerful story in terms of how you've experienced your care. I think for me, there's 4 issues there. That there's a connection between the socioeconomic status, access to services, system usability, as well as the quality of service that you received. But I also picked up one point of detail, which I think was sort of a little lost in your descriptions, which is the communication that you actually received. I think you talked about paragraphs and paragraphs describing to you stuff, but you didn't really pick out what exactly you needed to do next. And I think maybe the takeaway for us is how and what we communicate to patients in writing. I think that's quite important. If patients are struggling to understand what they need to do next, that just makes it more complicated needlessly, and I think that's an easy fix that we can do.
Thank you. Yes, Hisham Lil.
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to reiterate what colleagues said, Sarah, about the predicament and suffering that you very unfortunately had, which does not appear to be the exception. I think what you have told us today has an influence in terms of commissioning of dental services. The fact that there is poor access to elective dental care has a huge influence on the demand for urgent dental care as you've had. And that's something that we need to look into very carefully, the need for easy access, timely access to urgent and emergency dental care. And thank you again for sharing your story.
Thank you.
So, Sarah, thank you so much. Hearing your story is really powerful in focusing us when we come to the item to discuss how dentistry is coming to NHS Devon through what's called a hub model. But we need to be very clear that where we can influence what the message we're hearing from you and others is about what our priorities should be as we take that forward. So thank you. You're very welcome to stay on and to listen in on to those discussions when we come to them. Thank you very much again. Right.
Thank you.
We're going to come now to the next item on the agenda, which is around leadership. I'm going to ask colleagues to just note my chair's report and also the chief executive's report. And I know that, Jane, obviously we are in the middle of industrial action. We've also had recently our meeting, the board-to-board with NHS England. And I don't know, Jane, whether there's anything you would like to draw out to highlight from your report.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so in fact, there's two things I wanted to draw out from my report, and one was exactly that: the feedback in relation to the board-to-board meeting that took place last Thursday. So that was as part of the System Oversight Framework 4 process that we are in, and I think we are the only system in the country that is also our acute providers as well as our ICB at level 4, which is the highest level. The board-to-board, in fact, was due to take place before Christmas because it's part of signing off our exit criteria, which relates to the 4 domains of urgent care, elective care, finance and leadership, but through various train strikes, etc. That's why it took place last week. It was chaired by Sir Richard Meddings and had a number of representatives from the NHS Executive Board, and from a Devon perspective, it was chief execs and chairs, myself and Bill. I think it's fair to say we had the opportunity to provide an update on our submission of our draft operating plan, which took place on the 23rd of January. So we were able to give some assurance about further work that was in train to improve our position on our trajectories, particularly in relation to urgent care and elective care, as well as our financial planning. But I think, and of course, the next stage of that is a submission on the 30th of March. I think it's fair to say that there is a lack of confidence in our plan as it currently stands, and also a requirement for us to improve our ability to provide a granular level detailed plan, which does, say, address the gaps. And in many respects, although we have managed to improve our position, particularly in terms of our urgent care targets and trajectories, we have a lot to do to provide that level of confidence that we are going to be able to deliver, because I think certainly NHS board colleagues have not seen evidence of that previously, or not in a consistent way. To offset that, of course, though, is the work that has been taking place across certainly our acute providers and as part of the collaborative work, and in relation to our sort of clinical strategy. And also Bill was able to provide an outline of the work that is taking place in relation to our recovery plan. But certainly we have a lot of hard yards to achieve to really recover our position. And as I say, it was very clear that our plan needed to also be submitting a deficit position of no more, or certainly less than 50 million, which is a significant challenge. I'm sure Bill will pick that up later. I think, though, we were able to demonstrate a collective approach, and James led on behalf of Chief Execs on our presentation, and was supported certainly by Liz and other colleagues and our chairs to be able to start to be able to articulate us as working as a system. But again, I think we need to recognise that there is still further work to do on that, and part of the recovery plan is to really articulate that as a system, through a system lens as opposed to individual organisation lens. I think certainly the key thing will be, as I say, obviously things don't just stop dead on the 30th of March. We will then be putting in place a programme of recovery, which will require us working in a very different way. And of course, the next thing I wanted us to bring people's attention to, certainly from a ICB perspective, is on the backdrop of management costs savings that we need to take. But I'm just going to pause there because I can see Liz maybe wanted us to come in, because obviously Liz was with us there.
Thank you, Jane. I think you've captured the essence of the meeting really well. It was a very clear focus on how we as a system are going to work together to ensure that the issues that we would all recognise around this board are addressed, and addressed at pace. I think the focus on performance and finance were writ large, and a very clear set of messages around the importance of balancing off finance, performance and quality and safety of experience for people who use our services. I think what we also talked about is the scale of the challenge that needs to be addressed, and the opportunities we have. And I think what I heard clearly in the room is that we are clear about some of those opportunities, and Jane, you referenced some of those around, for example, how we progress working together around the way in which our acute services are delivered, for example, but also how we optimise our workforce. But the challenge for us absolutely is about how we work together at pace to address those issues to satisfy the concerns of NHSE, and I think those are exactly the concerns that are reflected by our boards and by the ICB. Thank you.
Thank you. Do colleagues have any questions? We're going to obviously be having a longer discussion about our financial position later, but are there any questions for Jane? Sheena?
Yes, a comment and a question. I know that there is no scope to talk about funding, formulae, the distribution of resources, things like this. However, if the pattern of organisational stress in terms of deficits and backlogs was randomly distributed around the country, then that would be fine, but it isn't. There's a systematic pattern which tends to be around peripheral ICBs such as our own, with evidence of consistent underfunding for kind of over 25 years now. And one just gets weary of trying to cut and shave off productivity savings when you have a pretty good idea that you don't have the funding that other systems have relative to underlying need to provide services. So we've been through this before. I just wonder if there is a case of revisiting this with a bit of kind of quantitative data. I've got to write a chapter for a book presently, so I might be able to do this, but it frustrates the living daylights out of me. The second frustration is that the kind of constant pressure that we've got on focusing on the acute sector, on the backlog, on the kind of emergency situation, constantly reduces our ability to focus our attention and our resources on strategic transformation around both prevention and digital. And it's just saving the pennies and losing the pounds in the long term. So it's this tension between what you can gain in the short term and what you can gain in the long term, which is just again, really frustrating for me. But my question, which may sound very blasphemous, is whether or not we actually use Soft 4 as an opportunity. There have been instances in the past when NHS England have kind of whacked out the stick and sort of said that you're failing and, said, right, we'll step in. I wonder if maybe we should positively invite them to step in and see if they can sort this mess out, because a number of us have been saying for a very long time that this deficit is not going to go away. It's going to get bigger because we don't have enough resources. And I'm just, I just wonder if actually we should just say, look, fine, you sort it out, because you'll say it's impossible, but, I just wonder if there's an opportunity there.
Thank you for those really important points, Sheena. And I wonder whether, Bill, this would be a good point to bring you in. And I also see that Nigel and Sian would like to come in too.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, I think you would expect me to say something. I think it's really important to understand where we are. We've commissioned an external report on the drivers of the deficit, which is almost available, and that shows that the underlying financial position in Devon is £242 million deficit. But when we look at the drivers, notwithstanding the issues in terms of rural coastal communities and peripheral organisations, they're almost all within our gift to resolve. And chief amongst those is our inability to make savings on a recurring basis. It is something that has become significant and is exacerbated over time. The purpose of us being in SOF 4 is that we sort this position out. And I do think, with the greatest respect, it would be an abrogation of responsibility if we ask NHS England to do that. That is effectively what they're already doing by putting us into SOF 4 and looking for the system to come up with system-wide solutions that it hasn't done before. The financial recovery plan will be focused on how individual organisations can increase their delivery in terms of cost improvement, but also is very focused on how we work together across systems. And initially that's at a chief financial officer level. We're next going to involve the chief operating officers and the CMOs and CNOs to look at those things that we have thus far have not been as successful as we could have been at delivering across systems. So as we look at shared corporate services, for example, as we look at high cost drugs, as we look at those things that we can procure together, we are increasingly confident of our ability to deliver greater savings at scale, at pace, with external support, so that we can meet the requirements in this year, and also that forms the basis of a comprehensive financial recovery plan for the next 3-year period. So that's what it is that we are doing at this moment. I don't see any change in the funding formula, because the current position with convergence is that we're £120 million above our target, as opposed to being below that. And there is no indication from NHS England or anyone else, from ACRA or anybody else, that will change in the foreseeable future. I think that is the situation that we've got at the present time. It is very difficult, it is very challenging, but I do think that we need to find those solutions ourselves, working as a system.
Thank you, Bill. I can see that Nigel would like to come in, and Jane.
Yeah, if I could just wholeheartedly agree with Bill. When I look round the table and I look round the colleagues that I work with, I think we've got a group of colleagues who are ready to accept that challenge, Sheena, that we from within our system can and will achieve what we're set up to do. So we talked earlier on this week, Sarah, about just the point you make, Sheena, about giving ourselves the space to deal with the breadth of what it is that we are here to do as NHS Devon, and indeed as One Devon. And that, of course, involves the prevention agenda. It, of course, involves the focus on inequalities. And I do think we've got that opportunity. I mean, invoking the memory of the great Dick Fosbury, who sadly died this week, we've got some transactional stuff to do collectively together. Bill's outlined some of that, but equally we've got some transformational stuff to do, and that is around the digital opportunities that we have. It is around the prevention, the reducing inequalities piece, but that's why I'm here, Chair, to rise to that challenge, and I completely agree with Bill. For us to abdicate that responsibility to somebody else, that doesn't feel right. It's certainly not why I'm here.
Thank you. Sian.
Thanks, Sarah. I agree very much with Bill and Nigel's comments. What came across to me very strongly at last week's board to board was their expectation that we work strongly as a system, that we collaborate effectively as a system. And there is already a lot of evidence of that and initiatives that we can build on for the future. So I think for me, a priority now is to identify the specific support that we need from the centre, and they are already providing us with some valuable support. But identify what further support we need to move over time to a balanced budget. So for me, that's the immediate priority. But I agree, we shouldn't sort of hand over to NHS England, but there's an awful lot that we can do ourselves to build on collaborative efforts that are already in hand and to genuinely work as a system. Thanks.
And to a certain extent, we already have handed over a lot of responsibility. It's one of the reasons why we do want to come out as soft 4, because we're told what our priorities are. There is a certain amount of top-down direction to this. And I would absolutely agree, Sheena, we want to be in a different place where we can be focusing more on the prevention and inequalities agenda and to have the flexibility to do that and on what's happening in our communities and the issues around mental health. I know Jane wants to come back.
No, I think, in fact, in many respects, you've just said it, Sarah. I think certainly I believe that we haven't got a perfect system at all. We've got some significant differences on how services are delivered. We've just had, to some extent, previously, we've had patient stories or citizen stories to highlight that. So our role as an ICB is about how we utilise the information that we do have to hold that mirror up. So I think that's, that is absolutely needs to be our ownership, as other people have said, and also, to some extent, I think making sure that we don't lose sight of, as part of the operating plan, our partnership plan and the 5-year or the forward plan, because as Sarah says, answers to a lot of this is around how we are working in the prevention space as well. So it's really critical. But I just want to again draw people's attention to the fact that we will have that is challenging now. Taking that forward in a sort of with a vastly reduced sort of ICB resource is going to be challenging. So that's an opportunity for us to refocus on where we need to do that, but that's why the partnership component is really important, because it will need to be owned by everybody.
I'm also rather remiss, I can see that James would like to come in, and also Sarah Lou Glover. James McInnes.
Thank you, Sarah. I just needed to sort of, I'm from local government around this table, and I feel your pain in terms of the finances, etc. And it horrifies me that anyone thinks we hand everything over to somebody else to sort. This is for us to sort. And it's, as I speak as the chair of the ICP, this is for us to sort in partnership. And we're not going to just shave grapes or shave gooseberries and save a bit of money. This is fundamental, the financial pressures in which the National Health faces and local government faces. And it is difficult. It is going to be very, very, very difficult. But we need to do it together, because we're here for the people of Devon, the geographical Devon, aren't we? Here? This is what the ICB is. We're going to have to take in coming months some very, very difficult decisions in local government. We're already having to do that. And we could say government needs to give us more money, but we have to live with the reality in which we are in and deliver accordingly. Thank you.
And that was very clear from the board to board that this is a whole system approach that we need to take to resolving this. Sarah Lou Glover.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it is a really difficult position, but I actually think it's a hopeful position, because I think it is an opportunity for the very transformational programme that we've been talking about, because it is the only way that we're going to do it, is to work as a system and to look at our VCSE partners, to be true partners moving forward. And actually, there's some incredible work that's already started in some of the locality care partnerships, and if we can harness that and build on it, and actually bring some of that positivity to that transformational change, and bring more of that around, the conversations that I'm being pulled into at the moment are. They're all incredibly difficult, but they're all incredibly hopeful, where people are saying we can't carry on doing what we've been doing and we have to do things differently. I've never seen participation taken so seriously and co-production really, truly being at the heart of what's happening. And you know, we were speaking yesterday to local authority colleagues who are actually saying we need to learn from health, because health are actually doing this really well. So there is something now where we genuinely have to think about shared practice, shared learning, and being transformational. Then we can do everything that Bill's talking about. And within, having spoken to Anthony and Bill, within their plans, prevention is there. It's definitely there and being thought about in the longer term. So I just wanted to put a hopeful slant on today as well.
Thank you. That's a good note to move on from. But before we do, could I ask that we maybe consider having on our action log something for our development session about the ACRA formula and the way it works, because I know that there are sometimes issues with us not recording things like multimorbidity sufficiently, and I know, Sheena, it would be very helpful to draw on your expertise for that. So if you're happy, I will add that to our action log. Thank you very much. I'm afraid we are a little over time now, so I'm going to move us on to the next item, which is around update on challenges facing our staff, including the annual staff survey results. And Andrew Millward's going to lead this item.
Thank you, Chair. I think in light of time, there are some slides in your pack, but I just wondered if I could just take some time just to highlight, I guess I'll just use the first 3 slides really, because I think we've already heard from Bill and others about the challenges we face as a system, but actually there are also some additional challenges that we're going to face over the coming years that particularly affect the 400 or so core staff who work in NHS Devon, and that's threefold really, if I can highlight them. So one is obviously helping to tackle some of the challenges that we've just talked about, but also we've been given recently a target, as every ICB has in the country, to reduce our running costs by 30%, and that is fairly unprecedented, isn't it? That's a massive challenge for us to face. In addition, how we work may also change, because there is a national review, as you may know, that's been done by Patricia Hewitt, former Health Secretary, who's expected to, I think she was expected to publish her findings today, but given the budget, I think is expected to publish her findings later this month. So we'll obviously hear from her, and she's a chair of an ICB in Norfolk about some of the things that she feels we need to change. And I think I just wanted to highlight the staff survey results in a way, because they've just been published nationally, and actually they're a good backdrop, aren't they, into how our staff feel in terms of how they'll actually navigate the challenges that we face going forward. So I think if I can just highlight, I guess, what we've been given as a challenge firstly. So as you'll be aware, Jodie, if we move on one, we are obviously in soft 4 as a system, but actually what we must do over the next 3 years by the end of 25-26 is make 30% real terms reduction in our running costs. So our running cost allowance, which currently is 22.6 million, will reduce to about 17. And I guess people could do the calculation on what that might mean for staffing, but that's a huge reduction in the staff who will work for NHS Devon. And we must fund the cost of that change from our current running cost budget. So actually the 30% does go up a little bit. And obviously at the moment we are running over anyway by about 3 million on our running costs. So if you combine all of that, that's a fairly significant challenge for us to face going forward. So not only do we have to obviously tackle some major issues, but we also got to go through a fairly big restructure of our own staff base. Just to highlight just one on then, I think for me, how staff feel is important when they're going through change. And actually our recent staff survey, where we were the 5th most positive ICB in the country, sets us, I guess, in a positive way. And actually, if I just highlight a few things there, people feel that we focus on their health and well-being, which I think is really important, and 8 out of 10 said we do a good job of that. We keep them up to date really well, and actually nearly 6 out of 10 would recommend NHS Devon as a good place to work. Only 10% wouldn't. So for me, actually, that's a good backdrop in which to tackle some of the things that we've got to go through going forward. I would point out that some of the big themes that came out of the staff survey that people said wasn't good were staff, were not enough staff to do the job. There's some irony there, and obviously some of the time pressures and pressures they've got on their work. So I think for me, I don't underestimate that. Actually, it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. I think Sarah Lou said it, others have said it. I think the scale of change will mean I think we have to look really carefully at the role, the size, the shape, our priorities going forward. So I think with some of this, even though it's a challenge, it's probably a good opportunity to look at all of that. I'll stop there, Chair.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and to all the staff who took part in this survey. Jane, I can see you would like to come in.
Well, just to say, I suppose we've just gone to... we're going to be meeting with Cornwall System in a couple of weeks, mainly to look to see what the opportunities are to work across the footprint, because there's quite a lot of areas where we think we could do probably something once. And also we met yesterday, Kate and myself, with the other ICS chief execs across the southwest to also look at those other things, other areas where there might be opportunities to work at scale and work in a collaborative way, so that we can really ensure that we try to enable the resources that we do have to be focused, as I say, on the priorities that we have. And I think certainly we recognise that there's always that challenge about making sure we have local knowledge and local input, but actually there's a real opportunity for learning across the whole patch and streamlining of some of our processes. So, I think before we, part of the next phase is very much looking at everything that we can do to release resources before we get into, I suppose, the sort of staff side of aspects, and also, again, making sure we continue to focus on enabling people to have the right capacity and skills to do the role as well. So we mustn't lose sight on the development aspect as we go forward.
Thank you. Kate Shields, thank you.
So I just wanted to reinforce Jane's point actually, and to link it back to the conversation around the money. So one of the things that we are really aware of, and this is for Cornwall because I don't know your data, that we have people who smoke, who have got cardiovascular risk factors, who then develop unregulated hypertension, who then develop atrial fibrillation, who then have thrombotic strokes. And of course, that then becomes dementia later on in life. So we know there are some things we need to start doing now that will have intervention on ill health or stopping ill health reasonably quickly, actually. And as part of the redevelopment that we're doing over the next few weeks and months, some of it has to be on that. What's the causation of the things that are driving the large attendances in our acute hospitals and our mental health trust, and how can we build that in to the redesign of our services? So it goes back to Sarah Lou's point, I think, as well, around where we are working with our voluntary sector colleagues, because they find people we can't find. And I think the two coming together could be quite powerful.
Thank you very much. So we'll be following this closely and updating the board. So I'd like to move on now. Hisham, did you have a comment you wanted to make? I wasn't sure whether that was a...
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is just a very brief comment, and we've mentioned it before, that, having a resilient workforce that has got a generalistic scope of practice would help a lot with reducing the costs as well, both in delivery of health and social care, but also at an ICS and ICB level in terms of what we do. So I think that's just the point I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just as we're going to move now on to the next item, which is around strategy and the delegation of primary pharmacy, ophthalmic and dental services. And obviously this is highly relevant to the very powerful patient story that we've heard earlier. And I think Jo Turl is going to lead on this item. Thank you, Jo.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. And first of all, I just want to introduce Melissa Redmayne, who's just joined us online. And Melissa's been leading this piece of work for us. So thank you, Melissa. And it's probably an opportune time just to thank Melissa and also people from all of our teams actually who have been very heavily involved in this work, and it has been a significant amount of work to get to this point, and I appreciate that this is a decision, or it is an approval that we need to make, but I appreciate it does contain significant risk with it, and we've not been able to fully mitigate all of those risks, but it isn't through want of trying for the teams working with the NHS England team to do as much as they possibly can to get us to this. So for the sake of time, I will take the paper as read. There are a few things that I want to update on since last month. So we actually came to the private session last month and had a discussion. There was quite a lot of feedback, so hopefully you will see that reflected in the paper. So we've now included an update significantly on the risk section, which I think was probably where the most significant feedback was, but also in terms of highlighting what some of the opportunities are. And we've heard from Sarah this morning in terms of Sarah's story, and hopefully we've been able to identify within the opportunities there are some things that we really think that we can do, and albeit access in particular is going to be a major challenge, and that won't be something we can fix quickly. There are certainly some things, picking up on Tandy's point, that actually might not be quite as difficult for us to solve, and they're some of the things that we can really sort of start to think about and focus in on. And also we've also highlighted with a bit more clarity, hopefully, the impact of some of our teams as well, because whilst we have the hub arrangement with NHS England, we are not getting any additional resource into the actual ICBs to undertake this work, and of course this will come with an additional level of work for us all to do and to undertake within our teams. Since the last time that I spoke, there are also another couple of significant things that have happened as well. So we've taken the paper to the Primary Care Committee. So the Primary Care Committee have had an opportunity to review the risks and input into the paper and the risks. We've also had the internal audit report as well. So we do mention the internal audit report in the paper. It didn't highlight anything that we weren't already flagging as a risk, but we've contained a sort of snapshot of the feedback. We haven't contained the full audit report because we didn't unfortunately get that until after the paper was written. And then very lastly, we have finally received the Memorandum of Understanding and the Delegation Agreement, but we didn't receive that till very late on last week. So very quickly, all of our teams have worked really hard to go down through that Memorandum of Understanding. And Melissa's worked with her counterparts across the region, so from the other ICBs, and we've collectively sent some feedback to NHS England around the Memorandum of Understanding. So as we sit here, we haven't got a finalised Memorandum of Understanding, so we can't ask you here today to sign the delegation agreement, but what I would ask is that you approve the recommendation that we have in the paper, which is obviously to take on the delegation, but delegate that duty to our chief executive to sign that delegation of agreement, which will probably be next week now or the week after. So that was the first ask of the board. Second ask of the board is to acknowledge the risks, continue to work with us. As I said, they're not fully mitigated at this point, but we will continue to do that work and continue to work through the Primary Care Committee, and you will seek assurance through the Primary Care Committee. And then also, just very finally, just to thank the teams, I think, for all of the work they've done on this, because it's been up against a really tight time frame. So I will stop there, and I will ask if there are any questions or comments. And obviously, Melissa is here to help me if I've missed anything as well.
Nigel would like to come in first.
Yeah, and Jo and Melissa and colleagues, thank you very much for the work that you've been doing on this, recognising the time constraints and the scale of this. The question really is whether describing some of the particularly dental capacity problems is a risk or is in fact an issue. And I think you know, given what we heard from Sarah this morning and what's in the both the audit and the paperwork that Melissa's described, it's a question as to whether or not we actually think that this is an issue that is coming our way rather than a risk.
Jo, did you want to come back on that?
Yes, I think we've described it as such because we know we're not in a place at the moment where we are delegated or even joint delegation. But I think you're absolutely right, Nigel. On the 1st of April, this becomes an issue for us. You are absolutely right. It's an issue here now, and I think it will remain an issue. I wouldn't want to sit here as well and promise that we're going to sort this in a really short time frame, because I don't think that is possible. But we will do our best to put plans in place that will start to mitigate against that risk. I also know we're reviewing the corporate risks on the risk register as well, so this will be an opportunity to weave these risks in with that and be really clear about what's an issue to us as an ICB and what is a risk as we move forward.
Thank you, Jo. I've got Judy and Graham, and also Jane would like to come in. So, Judy.
So like others, I would like to say how impressed I've been with our staff in the way they've coped with this. It has been incredibly difficult to get information, not because anybody at Region is being difficult, it's just very late. The fact that we're sitting here in the middle of March and we don't have final documents, I think we are still in a position of unravelling the issues. And so the issues and risks we might find more when we get into the depth of things. I have, however, great confidence that our staff will unravel these things and tackle them. And we learnt this a little bit when GP services were delegated, or GP contracting 5 years ago, that when things have been contracted very remotely, as is the case when it happens from a regional thing, there isn't the same relationship with the providers. And that is where I think that we will need to focus our energy to deal with what are, without doubt, very difficult problems in dental, pretty difficult problems in pharmaceutical, and hopefully not too many in the optical side of things.
Thank you. I'm going to bring Graham in next, and then Sheena.
Thank you. Well, I, for one, am deeply concerned for the obvious reason of our inability to control what we all recognise as the prime problem, which is the lack of capacity. We're not in control of the reimbursement rates. We know that if you can afford to pay, there is capacity in the private sector, but not within the NHS, and we can't control the reimbursement rates. So in terms of risk management, if we're looking at probability and impact, they're top right-hand corner already, and they're not easily fixable. However, to be a bit more positive, I think another learning from the very helpful case study this morning is there probably are things we can do to improve, not perhaps at the preventative end, but when you listen to how many touch points there have been and how many people have had to take calls and the like, all of those are wasted resources. And all we're doing is trying to sort out a problem that wasn't fixed at first point, which to me in this case was probably some pain management to start with, and then a defined pathway early on. So I think on the one hand there are things that we can do and improve significantly. I think we all need to really recognise that capacity risk absolutely dominates the problem, and I for one am not comfortable in the delegation and us taking it on. Sorry, but that's my position.
Thank you. Sheena.
Yes, I agree with Graham. I think part of the problem here is the nature of the dental contract, isn't it? And the fact that they don't feel they're reimbursed in the same way as GPs are on a capitation basis. My comment was actually about, taking on board the previous comments about the hopefulness of collaboration, is that there are things that we can do, and a query about whether we're doing this in a joined up way. So, for example, if we were looking at the situation in Plymouth, where I think Sarah comes from, one obvious way of actually, or one potential way of addressing this would be to bring services together so that you've got dental access, perhaps through university clinics, which would be free, with access to diagnostic stuff such as x-rays, links to GPs for pain relief, the sorts of things we were talking about with regard to the Covell Center. So, you know, are we thinking about this in a out of the box and round and joined up way? Because, you know, our very next paper is talking about not supporting a very venture that could actually provide a route towards improving dental access for a very deprived population.
Thank you. Liz would like to come in.
Thank you, Liz. Yes, just to respond to Sheena, if I might, Chair. So just for some reassurance, we've already started some of those conversations. So although we're not delegated yet, we've already met with the dental school, and I've got a meeting with a community provider down in Plymouth next week. So we are starting to think about the things that we already can do, and some of the things that will not take us time to deliver and make some significant differences to people from the start.
So a lot of colleagues want to come in here. So Liz next, and then I can see that
I'll be brief, because I think a number of the points have been made, and clearly the case for change is really well made, isn't it, by the story we had from Sarah earlier today. But not getting this right doesn't just impact on the services we're being asked to consider in terms of delegation. It impacts across the wider system, and I think some of the stories around inefficiency across that wider system were writ large. I guess for me, it's back to that engagement piece, and I'm just seeking clarity and confirmation that our engagement with local providers is really at the forefront of our thinking here, because it's only through effective engagement with those providers we're really going to get the opportunities realised that are set out in the paper here.
Thank you. Yeah, so thank you for the question, Liz, because you're absolutely right, and that's over the years now of having delegated commissioning for general practice. That is absolutely key to changes that we need to make, and the way we work with general practice now, we've built that up over a period of the last 4 years, is to absolutely engage with them and empower them in this space as well. But I won't sit here and say that that's not going to be challenging, particularly on a backdrop of reductions in running costs as we move forward. But we do have the hub, so we do have some really experienced individuals who are used to working with some of these contractors and some of the agencies that support them. But I think it's a really good comment, Liz, and that needs to be our focus. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Lou, and then Hisham.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of follow up really on a couple of things that people have said, but absolutely, it's about how much time, we talked about this last month, how much time do we spend saying no, and actually let's change that so that we are saying yes, we can do this amount, so that we don't keep, you know, exactly as you said, if we keep passing people time and time again, we're wasting time and energy, aren't we, where it could be in a better place. So where we're thinking about no wrong front door for mental health and SEND, you know, can we think about that for some of these other opportunities as well? We do it in ophthalmic, you know, how can we learn from some of these things of what we can do, as we said, you know, whether it's pain management to begin with, but what can we do rather than what can't we do?
Thank you. And Hisham.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to follow on from what Sarah just mentioned, and going back to our patient's story. It's also to do with the scope of practice of the workforce, and in relation to dentistry services, not just the use of dental therapy and hygienists on a much wider scale to provide emergency dental care and other elective dental services. But I know of work that's being done, for example, in the university, where they are planning CPD for the general healthcare professional population to provide some of that emergency care, which would have really helped our patient in a timely way. So not all of those problems that we are having problems capacity with need a dentist. They need a healthcare professional who's had relevant training. And that's happened in optometry, that's happened in other services where you have district nurses, advanced nurse practitioners, etc., etc. So I think we just need to think a little bit outside the box, and I'm not sure how much influence we have as future commissioners of these services. Thank you.
Thank you. Frank.
Thank you, Chair. As a primary care partner member, I have engaged with some of the providers. I am very significantly concerned about the delegation of dentistry specifically. Dentistry, even in the NHS, relies on people being able to pay. So the opportunity out of this is that we could look at the whole system and gear it towards those people who really can't. I think that's vitally important. We don't really have a choice about the delegation. We're going to have to take it on. If you did have a choice, you wouldn't at this point. I think the other important factor is actually trying to change the culture. Sarah's story this morning was really important about the multiple handoffs, and it is the inefficiency of the system. And I see this every single day in my clinical practice, probably 40 times a day. And if we can actually get to people being dealt with quickly by the right people at the right time, we will change the system completely. But that is the level of challenge we have to take on.
Thank you, Frank. Darren.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And I think building actually on Frank and Hisham's comments, so I think one of the things we haven't mentioned is obviously we've got the dental reform happening at the moment. And I think, yeah, particularly some of the elements in there around skill mix are a real opportunity to build on what you've already said, Hisham. But I think the worry is if we have a dental reform that is a dental reform rather than a full skill mix that doesn't bring in primary care, secondary care, potentially all we'll do is create, a different skill mix in the same silo. So I think, as we talked about, there are lots of threats, but actually within some of the things like dental reform, there are some real opportunities that actually, if we work as a system, we could actually make Sarah's experience much, much better.
Thank you. And I think the other thing that was very powerful from her story was the so-called helplines are really not helpful. A number of times people are wasting their time through poor signposting, and maybe that's something we also could have more flexibility to get right. And also the issue of wider prevention around children's dental health. I think there's a lot more we can do there. Alongside Frank and others and Judy, I have attended the regional conferences, which were very helpful in setting out the scale of the complexity around this, but also what we can get on and deal with. So whilst we don't have any option but to approve this, because it's a statutory requirement for us, I think that we can, at the same time as we approve it, note the very grave concerns that we have about the state of the service that has been handed to us at this point. I'm conscious, Jane, you wanted to come in and round off this discussion.
No, to be honest, you've done it. Thank you, Sarah. I mean, I would say that we've talked a lot, haven't we, about the acute end of the pathway. We've got Ruth here. I know there's a huge amount of work that happens actually through our health and wellbeing boards and through our understanding of local population about the prevention aspect. So as part of our dental improvement plan and programme, we will need to ensure that we are looking at the prevention aspect from the get-go. And again, picking up Sarah Lou's and others, we have to have a very honest conversation with our communities. There is perception that dental services is the same as general practices, and it's not. So this is the opportunity now to have that targeted and tailored approach. We're not alone in these challenges, but having previously commissioned dental services and made quite significant improvements in an area of great need, I do feel it is better that we have the ability to manage it locally.
Thank you. I'm conscious that we must move on to the next item, but I can see that Sarah Griepe is still with us. So, Sarah, I just want to assure you that your experience will be uppermost in our mind, and for all of those who are experiencing the kind of unacceptable levels of dental pain. So thank you again for your contribution today. I'm going to move us on now to the next item, which is the Plymouth Covell Center options report, and a really important decision. But just before I do that, I just want to note that, as I say, it is a statutory requirement. So can I ask the board for their support for Joe's recommendation that we then delegate responsibility as set out? Colleagues happy with that? Thank you very much. Right, so, and Joe, thank you as well for leading on the next item on the Plymouth Covell.
Thank you very much, Chair. Again, I will take the paper in the pack as read. There are a few things that I just want to highlight before I open it up for comment and discussion. So the last time we came to the board to talk about the Plymouth Covell was back in August 22, when you received the full business case, which you gave your approval to, subject to the receipt of the national capital, which of course was always the funding route for the build. Since then, there are a few things I just want to update you on. So the project team and indeed the wider ICB and local authority as well have been, I would say, relentless in trying to secure this funding through the national route. That included probably most recently a recent meeting with Lord Markham, which our chief exec and the chief exec of the local authority and leader attended. I think it was a helpful discussion there, but at this time it's not led to securing the national funding through the National Covell programme. Also worth saying that all of the pioneer sites have been written to and received a letter from the National Covell Board asking them to stand down any further work on their Covell pioneer projects, whilst the national business case, which we've all of course fed into as part of the pioneer programme, goes through the Treasury, and they are hoping that the Treasury will approve, hopefully for the next spending round, and there will then be some national capital which follows, but of course that won't be in time for us with the current timelines we have. The project team have also been exploring whether there are any options locally for funding as well. So there's obviously a real strength of feeling, and this board have been incredibly supportive of this programme from the beginning, as of the local authority as well. The local authority have actually offered to loan us the money to repay over a sort of 40 or 50 year period. We've explored every option for doing this. Unfortunately, we can't identify the budget given our deficit position and likely position into the future to repay that. We've also recently learned, in trying to explore all options, we've recently learned this week that it would actually be ultra-virus for us to actually receive a loan from the ICB from the local authority or another body. We have also been exploring if there are any options to use our system capital allocation as well. So we've scrutinised that for both this year and in future years. The whole allocation is committed for this year and in future years, probably up to potentially if the new hospitals programme potentially comes to fruition, then potentially there will be an opportunity then at that point to look at system capital, but probably until that happens, that is unlikely to deliver. And probably the last thing I should say as well, so myself and Nigel attended Plymouth Scrutiny on Friday, and there's a real strength of feeling, obviously, for support for this. There's a real disappointment that the national capital has been pulled. There is, as well, some strength of feeling that they want this to be supported locally, but also some understanding about our financial position as an ICB as well. I think the other thing, though, that really came out of that conversation was a real concern for the patients in this part of Plymouth, who are generally unrepresented, and also the future of those practices as well. So really for us, the continuation of the work is really to focus on those practices, continue to work with those practices, make sure they are shored up for the short term, but also look to what the medium to long term is for those practices and also the patients in this part of Plymouth as well. So I will go then to the ask of the board, which is to support the recommendations in the paper. I would ask if the board feel at this time that collectively we can't support the recommendations, just to be really clear about what the next steps are. Certainly we feel as an executive that we've explored all options, and I'm also very conscious that we're up against a timeline in terms of the builder and the agreement we have around a fixed price there as well. So I'll pause at that point, Chair, and open up for discussion.
Thank you, Jo. I know there'll be a lot of questions on this, but I'm very keen to make sure we hear first from Judy as the head of the Primary Care Transition Committee.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you to all the staff who've been involved. I know Jo has gone round every single circle she can think of to support this initiative. May I make a point that is not so much to do with the actual Covell Center itself, but it seems to me this is a really crucial decision point for us about priorities. And I'm a little concerned about some of the assumptions in the papers. And so I wonder if I might just challenge those. And I guess the question I'm going to be asking is, I understand we have no spare money, but could we swap this for something? I don't know how, I don't know the detail, but at the moment what's happening is we are prioritizing overspending services at the expense of services that we know would make a difference going forward. So I know we have SOF 4, I know the scale of the challenge. I'm really impressed with the effort that everyone is putting into tackling it. I know resources are tight. I know the Covell Center itself, the planning needs a bit more effort to make sure that it's really multiply used because there were some constraints from national level. But my feeling is we're never going to shift from a treatment culture to a health culture unless we do it soon. And I have been on the previous board, the CCG, and we just keep putting money into preventive things. And this feels like an opportunity to make a shift because so much work has been done already. May I just challenge two assumptions? It says in the paper somewhere that capital is needed for maintenance, long-term maintenance. And I'm sort of surprised it's suddenly needed now, but it wasn't needed last year when we approved a number of acute service schemes. Not we, the system. We talk about not affording the revenue consequences of this. I was deeply alarmed when it was thought that we might not even be able to commit to the revenue consequences in April 25 because of the financial challenges. And I would actually argue that we're dealing with the revenue consequences of all sorts of decisions that have been made by the overspending bits of our system. So we are supporting overspend in areas that weren't our strategic choice in terms of supporting people. We know that actually, if you look at things like Kaiser Permanente, or Kate was just talking before about reducing the need for expensive specialist secondary, tertiary services if you do your primary and preventive care well. And this centre was an example of a place where so much of that could happen. And so I feel that delaying this for another few years would be unwise, is my word. So I would ask, I do understand that the financial challenge is ghastly. I imagine being at the board meeting was extraordinarily difficult. But I would ask of Jane and her colleagues that you just have one more go to see, could we swap this for something else that's happening? Could we put a little more pressure on cuts from somewhere else to be able to afford this?
Thank you, Judy, for setting out so clearly the reason why these Covell centres were going to be prioritised in the first place and the importance in particular to Plymouth. I'd like to bring Sheena in because as a member of the Covell board, I think it's important that we hear her perspectives on this too. Sheena.
Thank you. Judy, I couldn't have said it better. I thought you really summarised those points well. 2 points really. The first is that I think that this whole vision, the concept, really strongly aligned with our strategic objectives around prevention, around partnership working, around bringing people together. It really, you know, in terms of actually creating a smoother pathway for patients and co-located services, which aren't just health services and social care services, but VCSE services, university services, a whole range of different things to really try to wrap up personalised care in a way that should actually be more efficient and cost effective is really, really where we should be moving. So it's hugely regretful for me that something we should be prioritising is taking a lower priority. My second point is that I do have some concerns about the way in which the costs, the marginal costs, etc., are expressed in the document, because what we're doing is taking a very short-term and quite limited approach to costing the costs and benefits of this kind of concept, whereas actually what we would expect to see if it was put in place correctly, and I do think that we underestimated the cost savings because they're very difficult to do. That kind of whole return on investment stuff is really hard to do with regard to health inequalities. But by taking a short-term kind of costing model, we're failing to factor in the cost savings that we would imagine would accrue from effective prevention, effective signposting, and effective coordination of services. So I do struggle with the way in which we talk about low cost, high cost, high risk, limited marginal benefits. And I just don't think that costing reflects what the Covell Center was trying to achieve. My final point, as I think about, I suppose it's about not reputational risk, but actually public understandings. I've noticed in the last couple of weeks that we've had a notification that NHSE is spending 13 million on a management consultancy company to help sort out its merger with Health Education England or something like that. And I think from a public point of view, you sort of sit there seeing these contracts, these enormous multi-million-pound contracts being paid to reorganise something, whereas we can't find the money, and the centre can't find the money to do something genuinely transformational in one of our most deprived parts of the country. It just doesn't sit well with me, and I would imagine it wouldn't sit well with many members of the public. And I do understand, and I absolutely understand how much work's gone into this, but we need to think in the longer term, not just in the short term here.
Thank you, Sheena. I'm keen that we bring in some comments and then come to Bill and back to Joe at that point. So I can see that Frank and Sarah Lou both want to come in. Frank.
Thank you, Chair. As a primary care partner member, I have to support the Covell Center. It hits all four of the main aims of an ICS: population health management, health inequalities, efficiency and productivity, and regeneration of part of the poorest part of Plymouth. So I agree with Judy that we should look again at whatever is already committed to. And my question would be, is if we are being transformational and we have committed to capital projects, how much of that money is spent on community development? Of those, what percentage is actually of those capital projects over the next 5 years are we spending on transformational change as opposed to things that we're committed to beforehand? So 10% of our capital budget for 5 years will pay for the cost of it at today's cost. Is there any way of looking at that, and does that fit with our intention?
Thank you. And
I think I have to agree with Sheena and Judy and Frank. Personally, the only reason prevention work doesn't happen is because there's always a good argument that there's no money. That is always the argument that's put across, to say there is no money, because there's always the more pressing, acute stuff that we need to do. But I think that the question has got to be that if we stop about looking at is there the money, but how important is the work, we might come to a different conclusion. I think I remember a few years ago in Plymouth, before the Life Centre was built, there was a bit of an argument about, can the council actually afford to have the Life Centre? We don't have money, the council's in the raid, and there's a lot of it doesn't need to go ahead kind of argument. But actually it still did go ahead, and I look back now at what that centre has become, a centre that was built at the time when the council didn't have money in terms of prevention and health and well-being and the community thriving and all that. I have to say, I think we really do need to think again about this centre, and yeah, there is no money, but I think reluctantly we have to think again. I think I have to say so.
Thank you, Tandy. And Sarah Lou.
Yeah, thanks. From Judy's point, have we actually looked, before we make this decision, have we actually looked at whether things can be swapped around? My guess is we probably have, with I know that sort of Joe's highlighted they've exhausted all routes. I think it is really important to remember that as much as I really want this to go ahead, that it was a national route that the money was coming from originally. And I think actually what we've done to try and support this is incredible. And I guess what I would say is this no forever? You know, is it a situation where, because of the financial position that we're in, we simply cannot do this at the moment? But is the pressure down to the building prices and quotes being held at the moment? However, if the positions do change and we continue to put the pressure on, just because we say no now, does that stop us being able to continue to put the pressure on that you know, these Covell centres were a priority, and that, you know, we don't lose sight of it, but is it realistic in the next few weeks that we can turn this around?
Thank you. As I'm keen to bring comments in quickly, then we can hear some other views as well. So I'm going to ask Liz and then Graham to come in. Oh, and I can see Ruth is patiently waiting online as well. So.
Thank you, Sarah, and I absolutely endorse the comments. I think the opportunity of bringing organisations together to work in partnership, including voluntary sector organisations, primary care and local community services, is a model that we've been promoting as part of our strategy for a long time. It's not unique to Plymouth. And the need for us to be courageous around the choices that we make around how I use our resources is going to be important for us delivering on transformation. But I do think I have to put in the room the challenge that we have in maintaining some of our core estate. There has been a lack of investment in our core infrastructure across Devon for some time, and when we're looking at prioritising our capital resource, it isn't the nice to do stuff, it is the core stuff that's keeping theatres running and core infrastructure running. And that's not a position any of us want to be in, but I do think we have to recognise that we're in wicked choices territory.
Thank you. Ruth.
Thank you very much. I think actually the points I wanted to make have been very eloquently covered by others. So I will just quickly summarise. So the first one is absolutely that recognition that this was national funding that we were due to receive. The whole system came together to try to find what might be a fantastic solution to really help us to develop a model to tackle inequalities in our most deprived areas. It was a whole system approach. We all worked incredibly hard on that. And I think it has been expressed, but I wanted to add my expression of just how disappointing it is that the national funding has been withdrawn. And that we, you know, really do appreciate the fact that every stone is being turned over to try to find some way to fund this, because it is seen as so important by all of our system colleagues. So I will not make any more points around that issue. On a more practical and prosaic point, I just wanted to make the point that the recommendation in the paper around the need to support those 3 GP practices who were due to move into the Covell Center, the recommendation in the paper appears slightly weak, but I believe from what Jo said in her introduction that a medium and longer term solution to those GP practices will actively be pursued and met. So I just wanted to flag that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. I think I'd like to bring next Graham Clark in on the capital issue, and thank you, Bill, for your email in advance. I think it'd be helpful to hear from Bill after Graham's point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I guess if we wind back to when these were being thought about and sort of same time-ish new hospital programme, there was a different public funding environment that's changed significantly since then. I think what's spooked HM Treasury is that change, and that they are concerned not just about the capital, which we tend to be focusing on today, but actually the revenue expenditure associated with it. And the concern is that we're now becoming much more short-termism, that we're really having to look at how to balance things in the very immediate future with all the pressures that we've already talked about here around this table. But to me, I think I have to distinguish between expenditure versus an investment. An investment is something that has a return, as opposed to expenditure which doesn't. And so, to me, I'm only really seeing two options, the 1 and the 6, as being viable ones for us to probably land on today. And I think the difference between those two in terms of where I would land is my confidence around the benefit statement. That I know all the difficulties of trying to quantify this, but when I first saw the business case, I was concerned that too much of the benefits lay in the more intangible end of the spectrum. And I think if we had more confidence that there was indeed a return within a reasonable horizon financially, then I think it would be easier to look at some of those switching in and out type of options, would be my position. So I'm sorry to reopen it, but I think re-looking at the benefits is an important part of any decision.
Thank you very much, Graham. And on the issue of capital as well, I would ask if we could bring Bill in at this point, but the issue that's often raised about we're underspending our capital allowances. And I know that you've set that out in an email, but I think there'll be many people following this discussion. So I think lots of options have been presented, and I'm just keen that we bring you in at this point to respond to those many points and the issue of capital, whether we can use any of our capital for this.
Okay, thank you. So I think that Jo covered some of the points in her preamble. So the first one I think I'd just like to reinforce is the ultra vires point. The ability for an ICB to accept a loan from local government is not something that's actually within our varies. So although an innovative solution has been looked at, that is not something that we could take forward. The point that was made in terms of maintenance and the fact that this is something we look at every year, we also need to consider that the backlog maintenance position across the estate that we have in Devon is significant. So we could spend the annual capital allocation many times over, and we would still have issues that we need to deal with. And that's one of the reasons why there was approval for the new hospitals programme in terms of the requirements across 3 of the acute sites to reflect the fact that there's significant backlog maintenance expenditure that's required. Having checked with all of the providers and gone through the capital programme again this year, it is fully committed, and we have not been able to find any difference there at all. I think the other point is this is a national programme, and that we've been informed it's been paused. We haven't been informed that it has been cancelled or that this work will not go ahead. And so I think the major risk that we're talking about is not that this will not happen at all. It's actually about the fact that there is a fixed price at this point in time, and that will likely increase. That I think is the issue. It's the inflationary risk going forward. And I think we should consider that. And we should also be aware of the fact that it's a national programme, not a local programme. The need is local, and I think the points have been very well made, but it's a national programme that has been paused by the centre, and we ought to, I think, respect that.
Thank you. And we all understood that this was dependent on national funding, and I think that is the key point of this discussion, that has now been withdrawn. Now, I'm very conscious that we are now running very behind our time, but in recognition of the importance of this to local communities, I'd like to bring Nigel, Andrew in, and also Hisham, and I can see Tandy wants to come back, but as I say, can I just ask you to be mindful that we are now running very behind?
Yeah, so I think there's absolute clarity on the point that this was to be nationally funded, and that process has been put on pause, so I don't think I need to reinforce that point. But the other is to pick up absolutely on the points that have also been made. We were really supportive of this because it seemed to meet the needs of all of the things that we're here to do. And as Jo outlined, just in terms of the primary care, but more broadly, the coalition of colleagues that we're working with in that system, we will try and find alternative ways to meet the needs of that population, in particularly those wards, while this process is paused. So just to reassure colleagues that it's not that we're sitting back waiting for something happening in 2 years' time. All of that work to try and carry on and support the population in that prevention, that will continue.
Thank you. Really important point. Andrew wanted to come in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think the executives had a really difficult discussion. Now, this isn't easy, is it? Because we can see the need, and that's been eloquently expressed by many of our colleagues. I think we just reflected the reality of which we face. Firstly, Matt, who leads our estates work and is working on the programme with Bill, said we could spend 4 times over on our capital allocation, the 83 million that we have to spend. I think Ruth said quite clearly, I think we were very supportive of the scheme, mindful that the money was coming from national pot of 40 million. I think for me, the big bit was what Nigel mentioned and Bill is the national schemes have been paused, and we clearly need to respect that. And I guess us being in soft 4 as well will limit some of the opportunities that we have on the finances. So I guess we had a very difficult discussion, but we were very mindful of the realities facing Devon, which you'll have heard at the board-to-board discussions.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief. It's really in relation to the support offered to the 3 practices that were going to join the Covell. My request really is to look again into that type of support and see if there could be a significantly scaled-down version of the Covell functions within those 3 practices brought together as an exemplar or proof of concept that would demonstrate in the future the importance of this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Mine is just a quick comment. Do we know how much we've spent trying to get this together, as in how much the system has actually spent on this? And is that reflected in any of our finances? Because if so, this is the national NHS sort of piling on costs on us, giving us false hope, and then that's affecting our resources. So is there any way of actually making that point or kicking that out of our finances to show that actually this isn't an expense we would have otherwise had?
Yes, I think this is a huge amount of public money that has gone into this, and I think, Joe, I know you want to come back, but could you include that in your response, because it is a very considerable sum. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Joe. I will just pick up that specific point first, just because I think that's a different point than anyone else has made and that's been responded to so far. So we've spent 2.6 million of NHS England nationally funded money on this. So nothing's been spent by the ICB, but that's still a significant amount of public money with an expectation that there would be capital that would follow that. It's also worth saying that the local authority have spent some money as well, although I believe they've had grants and other things like that have supported them enabling to do that. I suppose what I wanted to try and summarise, really, I think, Sarah, where I think we are, and what I've heard from everyone is a tremendous amount of support from this, and that's that was expected. And certainly when I asked if I could be the senior responsible officer for this project, it was because I believed, and we all believed, it was the right thing to do. So I think that what I've heard, I won't respond to individual points because I think Bill and Nigel and others have summed some of that up already. But I do think the reason why we landed on option 6 was specifically because we didn't want to leave the practices open-ended on this. But I do think, picking up Hisham's point, we will continue to work with the practices. We will work with them in the short term, and we are confident that we can do that. But I think we can commit to work with them in the medium to long term as well. And if by the next spending review there is support for the Covell project, I think we can reassess at that point. There's nothing stopping us doing that. And whether that is then something which is more focused around a general practice offer with all of the additional roles that surround that, I think that's an option that would be available to us at that time, and we can assess it. But I would ask that we follow the recommendation that's in the paper, but with maybe an amendment that we re-explore if and when the capital becomes available to us.
Thank you very much, Joe. So just to recap, there is no possibility of us accepting a loan from Plymouth, and we have no capital ourselves to fund the capital of this, and the extra revenue commitments, we do not have the revenue to fund. So would that be correct?
Yes, no, that's absolutely correct. You summarised that really well, Sarah, and I hear the want for us to go away and reassess, but without a way to borrow the money, I can't see a way in it that would enable us to do that, even if we had the revenue to pay that back. Also very conscious that we wouldn't have very much time to do that in, and that would involve some system agreement about where we were going to take money out of the system.
Thank you. So I think I'm very mindful of... Sorry, Judy, did you want to ask one final question on this?
Sorry, I don't want to ask a question. I just wanted, and in fact, Joe's just said it, we do have the revenue to fund this. We're making choices to put revenue into other things. I absolutely accept that we don't have the capital, but we are making choices.
Thank you, Judy. That's a very important point of clarification, but we would need the capital, as I understand it, to be in order to be able to proceed.
Yes, so just on that, yes. So even if we do have the revenue, or as Judy said, we're making choices about the revenue, and I think that's absolutely fair comment. We would still need a mechanism for borrowing the money, and that's the bit that we haven't got.
Thank you. So I think at this point we do now need to bring this to the point where we actually ask for approval for the recommendations that we've received from the executive team. So, colleagues, can I ask for a show of hands as to whether people are approving the recommendations as set out in the paper? And can I ask for colleagues to show their hands if they are not happy to approve? I'm also going to ask if people want to abstain. So we've got... And then are there any colleagues who would wish to actively record an abstention? None. Right. Okay. Could I ask you to confirm the numbers?
Yes, we've got 11 for and 1 against.
Thank you very much. So, and does that include Bill Shields? Did you count Bill? He was actively in support. So.
No, Anthony. So Anthony doesn't have a vote.
So Bill does. So
but Bill does. So that is 11. Yeah.
So 11. So 11. So in that case, that has been approved. And thank you, colleagues. And I would just like to again express our profound disappointment that the national funding has been withdrawn. Thank you, and thank you to all those colleagues across the entire system that have put so much work into trying to progress this. Thank you. Right, so now we're coming on to the next item, which is the board assurance framework. And then after that, because we are running so late, I'm going to suggest that we take a short break. But can I ask if Anne Cooper could lead on the item on the board assurance framework? Thank you.
I have a reason for keeping it short because I need to leave, so thank you. This is the first time the board assurance framework has been brought to you in public. It brings together a number of months of work to look at the risks associated with the 14 strategic objectives for the ICB. I think that we're in a good place in terms of capturing that now. And going forward, we will have a drumbeat of the strategic risks going to the assurance committees for their oversight, and hopefully some really good conversations that we can bring back, one of which has already taken place, and that was from the Primary Care Committee, so we can talk about that in a minute. I think the risks scores are in the early days of review, and I would ask that that is considered today as well. But the main area that I want to raise for the board is the feedback that came through from the Primary Care Committee. and the wish to change one of the objectives to make it far more relevant, and also the change in the risk description as a consequence of that. So I don't know whether Joe or Judy would want to mention or bring anything.
I don't think there's a need to say anything. The wording is all very clearly put in your report. There's no need to add to it.
Joe, did you want to come in? Could I make a comment on the wording? Because one of the discussions we had previously was that in the primary care section, we had some wording that reflected that pressures in primary care have implications for acute care, for example, but we didn't have the converse, because we know that when we see the secondary care sector not functioning well, then that reflects back to pressures in primary care. So in fact, I can see we've adjusted wordings as well to reflect that for both mental health, learning disability and neurodiversity as well, so that it does reflect the pressures back into primary care too. So thank you for adjusting that.
The other area was, it really does highlight the importance of prevention and inequalities. It brings into focus some of the conversations we've had today. So, and that's what the BAF should be. It should be a mirror, a reflection on your conversations and where you are. So I think that we should note that that's an important aspect of the BAF. And that we are looking at creating a population health committee, which has come out of, and it is one of the main recommendations that will come out of the governance review. So we will be bringing that back for conversation at another date. So some really positive feedback from carrying out this piece of work.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any comments on the wording or anything they feel that we haven't got right in this document? Thank you very much, Graham.
Yes, well, an audit and risk will obviously look at process, whereas I think a board would look at content. And I was just wondering about our comfort at some of the recent changes in the scores, because as I'm seeing it, our workforce challenges are getting greater, not easier. I'm not aware what's moved on digital and green, and I'm not sure about prevention, so I'm not quite sure where the good news is coming from to actually move those into amber rather than red.
So this is the opportunity for the assurance committees to look at that. And what I would be asking as part of the paper to those assurance committees is for them to consider those BAF risks. I know that they're going to the Finance and Performance Committee, because I see Bill's got his hand up. So there's an opportunity for conversation there and to give you assurance that they've looked at that.
Thank you. Bill.
Thank you, Chair. I think just to try to reassure Graham on one aspect, I think it's on digital. Regularly, I and Chair Malcolm C will be bringing the digital strategy today. We've made significant progress on the stages where both of the remaining acute trusts are in terms of their electronic patient record procurements are. So I do think there is significant progress that would lead to that red becoming an amber. I really do think, and I know that Sheena regularly attends the Digital Transformation Board as well, and there's a lot of progress and a significant work programme that's been taken forward.
Thank you. Sarah Lou.
Yeah, with the recent issues around SEND and various other things around mental health, learning disability, I just want to ask the question, are we all comfortable that the target is a 10 rather than in line with some of the other targets?
Thank you.
I think it will be a double act with Joe. I think it reflects that a lot of these risks, we will never get to a 1 and a 4 or a 2 and a 4. I think it reflects actually the difficulties that are inherent in this area. I'm not saying it's the right answer, that's the technical answer. So Jo will have the right answer.
Would you like to come in?
Yes, if I may, just very briefly. So we had a conversation at executives earlier on in the week, didn't we? And there's some consistency that we still need to bring in across the risks in terms of how we are scoring and how we are considering risks as opposed to issues as well. So I think there's a further bit of work that Anne and I are going to pick up around that, and that will be one of the ones that we look at within that.
Thank you. So
yeah, thanks. So that's something I'd be really interested to hear, so that I can take that back as well to other members of the sector, because actually I think it's understanding how those risks are calculated, because what it's leading to is having such a huge effect on longer term health for these people, on the risk of suicide, on the risk to our system of being able to continue doing what we're doing, on people's work lives. You know, so I guess I'd like a further conversation around that, around are we looking at the wider picture, you know, as far as the risk that it even poses to our very NHS service when it impacts the lives of our staff because of what they're having to support at home as well. So just thinking of that wider picture, really. Thank you.
thank you very much. Sheena.
Yeah, it's just about the digital piece. I absolutely agree with Bill that I think the Digital Transformation Board are making enormous progress. However, I would personally be kind of slightly more comfy on staying on red for a while. I think there are risks that we continue to focus very much on the hospital EPRs and not on the potential to shift the balance of care into the community and into the home through digital. And there are huge infrastructural barriers to doing that at the moment. So just I'd like to, well, unless there's a reason for external consumption for changing that score, I think it's really important to really focus attention on the needs to expedite that transformation out of hospital, not just within the hospital.
Thank you. And Jane, the last word to you.
Yep, sorry, I'll be quick. And just to say thank you to Anne and colleagues for getting it to the place that we are. As an ICB, this is probably, this is early days in articulating a risk register. It is very difficult because actually we've got to be clear about what's in our gift, what's our issues, what's risks, and what sits within individual partners. So probably everything we've had a conversation about doesn't necessarily sit in one place. So I think we just need people to remember that when we're looking at it. And I know that Anne and I talked about having a bit of a lock-in with exec colleagues as well. We might want to think about doing that with our non-execs too, just to go through this, because we just need to be really clear about what, and in fact, Sheena's point there about the digital, that's actually mitigation in many respects to a lot of our risks in terms of what we commission as an ICB. So it's not excuses. All I'm saying is this is quite complex. It's not like a risk or a BAF for an individual organisation. And this is also something we need to pick up with Councillor McInnes as well, because of that contribution from all partners. So it's that Rubik's Cube, which of course is the Rubik's Cube of all risks and BAFs, but actually this is Rubik's Cube to the power of 10. So, and we need some help with this. And the challenges back are really helpful because sometimes these are always difficult to sort of navigate your way through, and that sort of constant check and challenge is, I think, something we will be building in and taking through and getting everyone's help in, because it's, as I say, it's quite hard to pin down some of these issues. So thank you, but we'll be continuing to ask for more, and we wanted to bring it here today because we've got to start somewhere.
Yes, this is a living document, but we do have to make a start. So can I ask colleagues if I have your approval for the board assurance framework? Thank you very much. Now, very conscious of time, apologies that we're running late. I think we should take a short break. So can I ask that we meet back here in 10 minutes? Would that be okay? Thank you. of the emergency planning and resilience. So, and again, apologies that we went on rather late, but I think that was a really important discussion. So we're now back. So thank you for rejoining us if you're following us online. We're coming now to item 12 on the agenda, still within the section that looks at our assurance and oversight. And this is on our emergency planning and resilience. And thank you, Darren Alcon, our Chief Nursing Officer, for leading on this item. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair, and I'll keep this relatively brief, recognising time, but probably just to note, so obviously when we became an ICB back in July 2022, we also took on Category 1 responder responsibilities, which basically means that we are subject to the full civil protection duties. So this is the first time from CCG coming to ICB that we've done the full deep dive and the full assurance on the full civil contingency or civil protection duties. So this was done with ourselves internally and also done with our partners, and also then done a tabletop exercise with NHS England at a regional level, which myself, Phil Cootie and a number of others joined. So where we are today, we are giving you assurance that as an integrated care board, we are at a substantially assured or substantially compliant perspective. We're not fully compliant because there are three areas that are amber. A number of those are around infection prevention control, particularly around updating of policies beyond pandemic, and also potentially in terms of some of the wider elements of training, which has also been impacted by the pandemic. So we have got 3 ambers, but that does take us to substantially assured, substantially compliant. Also, based on that assessment, that all of our providers across Devon are also substantially compliant at this particular stage. There are elements of ambers in all of those plans, but what we are assured working with the emergency planning team, which meet on a monthly basis, that there are action plans and improvement plans in place within all those particular areas. So for approval here today, that I'm proposing that we accept the assessment supported by NHS England that we are meeting our guidance as it is under the Civil Duties or Civil Protection Act, and we are currently substantially compliant with those legislation.
Thank you very much for setting that out. Colleagues, happy that we note that then. Thank you. That brings us on to our urgent and elective care update, and Anthony Fitzgerald. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's nice to be talking around something that says operational changes rather than operational challenges. But certainly this is an update paper. It focuses on 3 areas. One is around the operational changes and the work of the Strategic Tactical Control Centre, discharge funding evaluation and virtual ward progress. I'm not going to go into any of them in huge detail, but would be happy to take questions. But certainly in terms of the System Control Centre, firstly commend their work over the last few months. They have done a sterling job in terms of coordinating system responses and also for making sure that we're feeding the right information to the right people at the right time. Cannot underestimate how much work that does require. There are 2 things that they're working on at the moment. One is around system-wide load sharing, which in a previous life used to be called intelligent conveyancing, but this is around deciding where ambulances are going. It is a very complex piece of work that we're currently in the middle of. We've just completed a 6-day pilot looking at how we can share ambulance queues to ambulance waits between organisations. And as I said, that's a very simple thing to say. It's a very difficult thing to actually balance that level of risk across a system like Devon. So we're working with SWAST actively to implement something later this month with ongoing conversations, and our clinical colleagues are very much to the fore of those discussions. The second thing then is around escalation management, and that does lead from the conversations around load sharing and using the work that we did as the result of our critical incidents in December, which I did update on in previous boards, but certainly we've done a lot of work in terms of reviewing our policies, reviewing our escalation processes, and particularly out of hours, so that we know exactly that we're making the right actions at the right time and helping to stop things progressing any further. And then the two other parts of the paper relate to discharge funding evaluation, and we were asked to bring back an update. And unfortunately, as we went through the evaluation of our discharge funding and recognising that money has been spent, it became very clear that actually we needed to look at all discharge funding. It's a very complex funding arrangements, and we have ongoing discussions with Devon County Council relating to that, but also about some of the other pots of money and funding that have been made available over the last 12 months. That work then has therefore taken a slightly different stance and will be feeding back in subsequent board meetings once we've completed that. And then the third part of the paper was very much an update on virtual wards, where we've perhaps not seen the traction that we would want. It was very much part of our previous work around capacity and demand, and although we put together, I thought, some quite robust plans around virtual wards, they did not come to the fruition that we wanted, and our utilisation has been at sometimes less than 25%. We are very keen, though, that we progress this, and we'll be taking a different approach, and it will be feeding in as part of our overall planning in terms of improving urgent and emergency care, and that work will feed into the subsequent plans that are coming back through various committees, finance and audit, and quality and performance as well. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that work and presentation, Auntie. Judy Hargaden, would like to come first.
Thank you very much. It's very helpful information. Can I just ask about virtual wards? If we've had trouble getting people to use them and we have trouble staffing them, which you've explained very clearly, how realistic is having 227 beds by April 24? And my second question is, virtual wards really ought to be run by community services, not by hospital services. Is that the case? Or are these being run by hospital services as opposed to acute trust community services? And yeah, those are my two questions.
So I think in terms of our confidence of getting these up and running by 2024, I think we have more confidence than we had previously, mainly because we've revised the staffing models. So we've looked at actually how we can do it rather than trying to press ahead with what hasn't worked previously. I think your point around who actually runs such facilities is a good one, and actually looking at how they have worked in some areas, taking a much more locality-based approach is a good thing. Not just leaving the whole responsibility with our acute providers, but actually making a much more system utilisation approach is a much better way of doing it. And certainly that's a key to our plan. We do have trajectories in terms of utilisation, so I'll be able to update based on that. So I think it's a staged approach, building on where we are at the moment, but also recognising the limitations of what we've done previously.
Thank you. I might just come in on the virtual wards issue first, because I think there is a strong reason to be optimistic about it. It's got very strong clinical support within organisations and a emerging evidence base that would give us confidence that they will deliver the benefits that have been aspired to in the system here. Certainly when I look at what we are trying to achieve in my organisation, looking at frailty, so those frail elderly people in the community, how we address some of the cardiology pathways and also our respiratory pathways. The recruitment to the right skill mix of those staff is really important. I also think we must move away from the kind of the artificial divide between acute and community, because it's our population. And I think what we are aiming to do through virtual wards is making sure we do as much as possible in the community to minimise the risk of people coming to hospital, but using the expertise that sit within the hospital sector to make sure that we do that in a sustainable way. So I think that there is good reason to be optimistic about that. In terms of the update, I just want to first thank Anthony for the report. I think it's really important that we have the focus here, and I really welcome the work that we are doing here in re-establishing the Urgent Emergency Care Board and making sure it's coordinated. We've got some significant challenges in urgent emergency care and some key deliverables that have been set out, and we talked about it earlier in our soft conversations. And it'll only be by collaborating across the wider system and looking at our individual and collective contribution that will drive the improvements that are necessary, and having that coordinated at system level I think is critical, and it's great to see that emerge. Thank you.
Apologies. Sheena.
Yes, I'm going to express a bit of naivety here. I've got a couple of questions about virtual wards, because my understanding originally about virtual wards is that they were sort of out of hospital support facilitated by digital innovation. I'm starting to question whether that is the case in the way in which we're defining virtual wards in this case, and that I know that we're talking about quite a lot of actually community staff going to the home and things like that, and I literally have not got a clue about the role of digital. So that's my first kind of question. The second is that if we are going to deploy digital in terms of trying to shift the balance of care out of the hospital and into the community, we probably would want to put a little bit more effort into thinking about preventing admission to start off with. So that would be identifying the kinds of patients with long-term conditions, multimorbidity, frailty, etc., who with support with wearables, environmental sensors, etc., could perhaps be monitored remotely and with getting in early rather than them coming to hospital. I'm not sure that we have the infrastructural readiness to incorporate those sorts of wearables and things into our systems, which brings me back to what we're meaning by virtual wards. My third question, and this is where I was looking at it thinking, hang on a minute, is that when I had naively thought we were talking about digital solutions, was about the costings of this. So looking at the costings that have gone in the paper and looking at that as a per bed capacity, we're talking about really significant costs here. Have we looked at the kind of cost benefits and whether the kind of per bed costs are actually cheaper than keeping people in hospital? I'm really confused. But I'm probably reading it wrong, got something stupidly wrong.
Thank you, Sheena. I can see that Jo would like to come in and respond to this as well. So.
Yeah, thank you, Sheena, for the question. It's a really good point, actually. And at the moment, we've got, so we're just undertaking a review at the moment of where we've currently got to with virtual wards and what the next part of the transformation programme looks like, if you like. So when we originally established the virtual wards, very clearly they were to support discharge, but as well support admissions avoidance. So just because of the time when we've implemented those, and as you know, as people know, workforce etc. was a bit of a problem. We very much focus on the discharge element, but we have the actual clinical pathway model describes a referral route in through general practice and the community into our virtual wards, but that's the next phase, and I think that's what Anthony alluded to earlier on. We do also have remote wearables as well, so that is part of the clinical pathway, so that is an embedded part of this. I think the next job, if you like, is to understand how we extend the use of those, particularly into people with other comorbidities as well, but that is part of the programme of work that we're undertaking at the moment.
Thank you. Bill.
Yeah, it's kind of building on the point that Sheena made. I think that, in terms of virtual wards, I think there is certainly a digital component. We are aware, I think, across the system that we have a number of different providers, a number of different models. One of the things that we'll be looking at as part of our further work on financial recovery is on the digital work stream, is to really understand what it is that we have spent money on in the past, how optimal those schemes have been, and how we can actually prioritise and reprioritise those going forward. So I do think there is a big part for digital to play in this, but what we probably need to do is to make sure that we put all of our eggs in one basket, because we've got a number of different solutions across the system, and now what we need is something that's much more of a systemic approach.
Can somebody comment on the costs of these things? The costs that are outlined in the paper just seem very high for the numbers of beds that we're talking about.
Anthony, would you like to come back on that?
Certainly, we can share some information with you relating to those in terms of the comparative cost between a virtual ward bed and a hospital bed, and there is a marked difference in terms of it is far cheaper over the long term, but certainly we can share further information with you relating to that, and also some of the national guidance as well, which I think is a good base point.
Thank you, and I know this will return to board when you've done further work on the evaluation, so could we as an action add that to the future planner, please? Thank you, and perhaps you could give us some guidance, liaise with Jodie on when the best time to bring that back would be. Thank you very much. Right. We're now going to move on to the next item, which is on the finance section. So we're going to hear our finance reports, and thank you very much. Bill Shields will be leading on this. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Chair. So I will take the reports as read. The major element that I would like to focus on this month is the movement in the financial position. You will see that there's been further improvement from the position that was previously reported to £49.5 million. Part of that is because we have transacted £4.5 million transfer to each of the 3 acute providers in month 10. So their positions have improved by £1.5 million each as a consequence of that, and the ICB position has changed again as a consequence. We continue to forecast £49.5 million as the year-end outturn position. There may be some amendment to that. If any additional monies are made available to the ICB, then they will improve that position, and that's something that will be reported as we go through. I know that board members have expressed concerns in the past and also wish to be apprised of the risks in terms of our position and whether we could hold that position. Hopefully, now that position has been the same for 3 to 4 months, there is growing confidence in our ability to actually deliver the position that was reported when we looked at the reforecast. This doesn't mean that as we go into the next fiscal year that things will get any more easy, and board members have heard earlier in terms of the discussion that we had with NHSE nationally in our board-to-board meeting that the expectation is our financial position for next year will be no worse than this year. And in fact, the expectation is it will be slightly better. So the latest indication on that is that a number of around 47 million is what is expected going into next year. That's still a significant deficit, and that position will still be supported by significant utilisation of non-recurring monies. And as a consequence of that, as I have said before, it's really important that not only the ICB, but the provider organisations and NHS Devon working as a system focuses on how we deliver recurrent savings to the level that is required. I've already said that the underlying position as we go into next year has been identified as a £242 million deficit. We know that from the work that has been commissioned already, if we do nothing at all, and if we were to make no savings and no efficiency improvements going forward, that would be likely to become a £720 million deficit in 3 years' time. So there's a significant amount of work to be done. The reasons for that are that our sources reduce over time in real terms, and in some cases in absolute terms due to the impact of convergence because we are currently over target. And we expect to see lower levels of real-term growth from fiscal year 24-25 onwards. So the pressures continue to build on the system, and as a consequence of that, that is why we are so focused on system-wide financial recovery, looking to engage each of the organisations to help them deliver the CIPs that they need to deliver internally, and then to look sensibly at those elements where we can come together as a system and work on significant system-wide savings that organisations would find it much more difficult to do on their own. And by doing that, and by identifying a number of work streams with identified senior responsible officers and also a robust governance arrangement across the system, there's growing confidence that we can actually deliver what will be a significant financial improvement. But it's something that will take us a number of years to achieve, and we expect this to be a 3-year financial recovery. At that point, I will stop, and I'm very happy to take any questions on either the ICS, the ICB financial positions, or indeed the financial outlook going forward.
Thank you very much. Judy Harkerton would like to come in.
Thank you very much, Bill, and thank you, because these reports become more informative every time, so it's very helpful to understanding. I'm looking at page 139 of 220, where you're listing the financial risks. and the CIP shortfall, which is across a number of organisations, of 47 million, I guess. Can you, and I know you've had some work done on the causes of our position, can you explain why, or what you have found out about why we seem to be unable to make these committed cost improvements in our system?
Absolutely, and I think that the findings of the work that has been done thus far would suggest that cost improvements in the organisations in Devon have tended to be the sole or exclusive preserve of finance directors. So finance directors have been those who focused on cost improvement. And as a consequence of that, we've tended to look at areas which are largely non-recurrent in nature or quite technical. So holding vacancies would be an example, looking at the levels of funding and holding some of that funding back and taking that to the bottom line. What hasn't really occurred within organisations are some of the things that would deliver significantly greater savings. So looking at theatre productivity, for example, some of the things that we have heard from the model hospital in the gift work, the number of cases that are being undertaken on a surgical list. We need to also, again, look at things like consultant job planning, which is something that should be reviewed on a regular basis, and then also look at outpatient templates so that we can be clear that we have the balance of admitted and non-admitted activity in an appropriate way. And those are some of the areas where we genuinely can improve the financial position, but also do that in a way that doesn't impact negatively on the activity position. Over the last period since COVID, we've seen that the costs of the workforce in Devon has increased by 16%, and at the same time, productivity has reduced by 19.5%. So there's clearly quite a lot of work that needs to be done within organisations and across organisations, looking at the workforce, looking at the increases in workforce that we've seen, understanding those increases, because the data tell us that there's a significant increase in the non-clinical workforce, interrogating that and understanding the benefits that we've derived from that, and also how we can optimise that going forward. In the new way of working, which the Financial Recovery Plan will talk to, and what's really needed and what will be much more beneficial when we're looking at delivering cost improvement savings is that this is an executive and a board level responsibility. It's not the sole responsibility of the finance director or the CFO, the chief operating officer, the CMO, the CNO. The board has to be absolutely engaged in these areas. And I think that that hasn't been the case in Devon. And this is not to denigrate any of the work that's being done. It just now needs to move on to a greater level of sophistication, and that will lead to much more successful delivery in terms of the financial position.
Thank you. That's just such a very, very helpful answer in understanding all of it. Thank you, Bill. And I hope that we could ask our executive to let us know if there becomes a time when you feel that full partnership engagement from the full board teams, not just the finance directors, as we go forward. I really hadn't realised that the finance directors had been left to do it on their own. It's helpful to understand. Thank you.
Could I ask for a point of clarification as well, Bill? I've seen the draft of the drivers of the deficit report. When are we likely to be able to see that in a place where it can be published? Because I think that will help people to understand some of the difficult decisions that we're going to have to make going forward.
There was a first draft. I think in that we recognised there were a number of areas that needed to be looked at again. So in particular, continuing healthcare, prescribing, and so Deloitte are currently working on a second draft of that, which I expect to receive by close of play today. The plan then would be to take that to the ICB Finance Committee in the first instance. I'm just looking for a date because that's been rescheduled a couple of times in order to accommodate the operating plan framework submission. And that report at the same time would be shared with organisations, because we've always been clear that the drivers of the deficit provides a reset, rather, in terms of the single version of the truth, that we understand what the underlying position is, and that then provides the platform going forward for the opportunity assessment. What I think should also be made clear is that in agreeing the drivers of the deficit report, in order for us to have the support that we've required in the operating plan submission, Deloitte have done some of the additional work that we would have expected to see in the opportunity assessment. So the drivers of the deficit report now looks at those areas that have contributed to the deficit, and then takes some of those forward and provides us with an indication of the areas that we need to look at that will be the focus of system-wide working. We've already established 5 project initiation documents, and we're looking to increase that by about another 3 or 4, so that those will then form the basis of the work streams that deliver system-wide savings. And then, subject to further board approval, we'd be looking at a further engagement, which would be focused very much on continuing the opportunity assessment, and then, crucially for us, delivery. Because delivery and execution are the areas that we know we've been less successful at in Devon in the past, and this will be the area of focus going forward.
Thank you for that, because one of the things that came out very strongly from our board to boards was the issue of pace, and that we don't have the luxury of time. So are some of these things going to be underway before we wait for the full report, issues where we know that we've got clear evidence that we need to make progress?
Absolutely. So we've already had early discussions with NHS Shared Business Services about what we might do around shared corporate and back office services. There's an all-day event tomorrow that I'm chairing with the CFOs to look at how we close the gap that we currently have in the operating plan going forward. And then there's an all-day session next Tuesday, which will include chief operating officers and HR representation, to make sure that we ensure that that financial plan is not the sole preserve of finance professionals, and it is something that can be implemented and be done in a way that doesn't adversely impact on patient care, on performance, and on the other aspects of delivery that we need to ensure we can commit to going into the next fiscal year.
Thank you. If there are no other comments, I will thank you very much for that, Bill, and we're going to come on. Oh, beg your pardon. So sorry, Graham Clark.
Thank you. I thought I'd let the discussion go on that first piece before moving to capital, please. So I think in the last board meeting I raised the question as, are we really going to achieve the numbers that we were putting in? And a month has gone by. And when I look at the total capital position, year to date we've spent 70 million. Full year we're now forecasting overspend at 200 million. So that's 130 million in 2 months. So it begs the question of, did we just get our calendarisation wrong? Are we really going to hit that forecast? And is it really that backloaded through the year? And I guess I put it in the context of the discussion we had with Covell, which I think just highlighted that, yes, there's a revenue expenditure associated with CapEx, but CapEx itself is very, very constrained, and the prioritisation is really important to us. So I just questioning, are we comfortable with our capital management processes?
I think to be fair, Graham, that there's always room for improvement, and the focus in this year, it might not appear like that because of the overspend, but our focus during the course of this year has been predominantly on the revenue position, because that's the area of greatest pressure. We will be looking at how we can optimise the capital position going into the next fiscal year. There will be an updated report going to the Finance Committee to look at the closeout position in this fiscal year later this month, and we need to ensure that there's greater liaison than has been the case between the ICB and the individual organisations, so that we can land our capital forecasts in a much more effective way. One thing I would say is that, and this is not to be critical of anyone, what we have seen this year, possibly to a greater extent than we've seen in previous years, is significant additional monies being made available late in the year, and that these are all earmarked monies. So to the point we discussed earlier, we've received a lot of frontline digitisation monies. There's a requirement to use those monies or lose them. So we're looking at how we can actually spend those monies and carry those monies forward, but they are specifically earmarked for EPR implementation. So there has been quite a bit of additional earmarked funding. The organisations, the trusts who I've spoken to are very clear about the need for them to carry those positions forward, and that's the basis of the forecast that you see here. As I say, earmarked monies being made available late in the year do cause us to have some considerable difficulty. If they weren't earmarked, then it'd be potentially a different situation, but we're trying the best that we can to make sure that we don't underspend and we don't end up in a position where monies are handed back to NHSE, because that would be significantly detrimental to the system.
Thank you very much. We're now going to come on to the committee chair's report, and we're coming first to the Quality Committee February meeting and an escalation. Thank you very much, Hisham Khalil.
Thank you very much, Chair. So there is a written report. I won't go into it for time's sake. The escalation relates to a discussion we had in the committee about the 78-week wait and the commitment of the system as a whole to responding to the NHSE letter about that. We had a detailed discussion, and following the meeting, we had an assurance from the Director of Commissioning for Urgent and Elective Care about all patients by the end of January being given an appointment, and then the intent that they were seen by the end of March, but there were problems with that due to cancellations, etc. But the Director of Commissioning has provided a detailed action plan following that online, and I believe that will be in the IQPR report by Darren as Chief Nursing Officer. He will refer to that. So I guess it was only about getting assurance that, you know, that this is happening, and if there are any challenges, what we as a board need to do. That was the area, and Darren, I think, is referring to that in his IQPR report as well.
No, I think it's all covered.
Thanks, Chair. So if I come straight on to the Integrated Quality Performance Report, I'm going to focus on one element, which is the element that Hisham's just referred to, and then Anthony and Paul may want to raise any exceptional, extraordinary elements from a performance or a workforce point of view. So as Hisham said, at the Quality Committee, we were not assured, based on the information that we had at that particular time, particularly around the escalation of 78 weeks and the asks from a national perspective. This relates to two letters from NHS England, one on the 12th of January and then a further follow-up on the 26th of January, which had actually 6 actions or 6 requests of providers, which from an ICB point of view we've been supporting and overseeing, and I think where we see a number of the Tier 1 overview and scrutiny, we know that these are being scrutinised on a weekly basis. So the area that was escalated to the Quality Committee was much more and very focused around the first action in that letter, which was very much around the 78-week cohort who have not at that moment in time got the decision to admit. So these are individuals that were required to have an appointment, so the next appointment booked by the end of January and that to be completed by the end of March. And that was the area where I think, again, question and answer was giving us a level of not assured, which is absolutely right why this has now come to escalation to the board. However, based on further conversations and further work with our commissioning colleagues, is that we are in a better position, so we can confirm that those actions were undertaken by the providers. So that booked next appointment by the end of January to be seen by the end of March. However, as with everything, with the 7th of March, this is a position that's now a week old, that there were 227 patients who potentially had not been seen, so had an appointment, but ultimately have then not been seen as a result of many things. And that could be cancelled appointments, could be patient choice, a number of areas. That is now being completely scrutinised through the Tier 1 meetings with NHS England and the ICB. That number is seeing significant reductions week on week. There is a particular challenge with neurology within that particular element, which makes up nearly 50% of those numbers. And what we are assured on, there are a number of those elements that are now being commissioned through InReach that will be supported through the next 3 weeks and take us through to the end of March, recognising this was a position of the 7th of March. Just quickly, recognising that these are not areas that drove us to the original escalation, but I think for completeness it's important that we cover off the 5 other elements within that particular letter because they are all linked. There was also an expectation that all patients at 78 weeks with a decision to admit should have a recorded to come in date by the end of January, with the first definitive treatments actually scheduled by the end of March. This is the area that we have not achieved. I think that's very clear that that has not been achieved. And as of March, there are still 1,601 individuals that are in that list. The trajectory continues to see improvement, but I think it's very important to note at this board that there are still 1,601 individuals that are being scrutinised through the Tier 1, but have not got a date within that are 72 weeks and above that have not got a date. In terms of the other 4 actions, which were around patients that were waiting over 52 weeks for referral to treatment pathways, that robust process is in place around validation, and we know that that is in place with all trust and is being checked and scrutinised through again to Tier 1. Date of last review, data for this is a data accuracy, data quality issue around the 78-week cohort. Again, we have assurance that those areas are implemented, as are actions 5 and 6, which are choices of patients being correctly coded and where patients have been transferred to the independent sector. So correctly coded, absolutely right, and we know that we've got assurance now in compliance. And we are also in weekly meetings with independent sector elements, and there are currently 10 patients through patient choice that are in that pathway that will still expected to breach their 78 weeks, 72 weeks at the end of March. So overall, and I know a number of individuals have met outside to gain a further level, quite rightly, of assurance, is that the element of escalation, we can report that ultimately the position that we're in at the moment, as in that guidance has been met. However, through patient choice, through cancelled appointments, there are a number of individuals that will still not be at that point. But I think the point to note here particularly would be the area that I'll be drawing the board's attention to through the IQPR are the 1,601 individuals that are still without a date for admission or treatment. I'm not sure whether Anthony or Paul wants to add anything before we open for questions.
No, it's just to add to the point, I think, in terms of weekly monitoring of this, which continues to review each patient and each pathway. So that work is ongoing. Not that that necessarily provides a level of assurance, but actually in terms of looking for additional mitigations, that is happening.
Thank you. I see Paul would like to come in, and also Nigel. Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to highlight that there's an issue that we've drawn your attention to a few times around the management of agency costs. So it's clear that we're spending more than we wish to in terms of agency expenditure on workforce. We're currently expecting to end the year at about 3.3% of our pay bill. I think it's just important to note that whilst it's more than we'd like, we are habitually the kind of best performer, i.e. lowest spender of agency as a proportion of the pay bill. So there's lots of work going on, particularly around looking to outsource the management of our banks for next year. And just looking forward, there's a national target for systems and therefore organisations to spend no more than 3.5% of their pay bill on agency staff for next year. We've got strong plans to get way below that. So our plans at the moment are around about the 2.5% mark, and we've got a high degree of confidence that we can hit that. So there's a good news story in amongst all of that for us.
Thank you. Nigel Aitchison.
So there are a couple of things I'd like to say. One of them is Anthony's team in particular have been working incredibly hard and closely with colleagues in all of the providers and indeed national colleagues to try and meet the really quite challenging numbers of people whose care we want to try and bring forward and expedite. And that has resulted in some really pretty innovative cross-organisational working by some of our teams. Particularly, I would highlight our orthopaedic surgical colleagues and obviously associated teams, and also ophthalmologists. Really impressive examples that we hope then to build on. And to Liz and colleagues working in the acute provider collaborative space, not only that work, but also the work to try and provide some support across some of our very fragile surgical services, such as urology, which colleagues around this table have heard before. So there's that piece. But I think it's also fair to make colleagues on the board aware of the impact that industrial action by various groups in the health services have had over quite a prolonged period of time. Certainly in my 34 years, I've never seen a period of such prolonged activity, and that involves both our provider colleagues and our colleagues in Anthony's team in particular in a huge amount of additional work in some of the mitigation to make sure that the very acute and urgent care services are in place to meet the needs of the population of Devon during these periods of time. But it absolutely is having an impact on the waits that people are having for both outpatient and inpatient activity. So I thought, first of all, the great collaborative work that's being done right across the system, fantastic. But there is no question that the impact that these periods of industrial action have had on the ability for all of those teams to continue that work, whilst at the same time having to prepare mitigations for the impact of that.
Thank you very much. Are there any other points? Yes, Anthony.
Certainly, just a couple of things to flag from the report. And I did mention last time we were going to be expanding the executive summary. That will be in next month's report, so apologies it's not here. A couple of things I just wanted to highlight. One was around some of the improvements in terms of ambulance hours lost, and actually significant reductions there. Still a long way to go, but actually there is some improvement. And actually around no criteria to reside patients as well. Those improvements do continue. One thing to highlight, though, is actually around diagnostics, and I think actually we need to be mindful of that. There has not been necessarily the improvement there, and considering the impact that has on some pathways, just wanted to highlight that, and we'll bring back further details.
Thank you. Could I just, following on from that, ask a question to you about, obviously a lot of the discharge funding comes to an end at the end of this month. How concerned are you about the impact of that?
Discharge funding is incredibly complex, as I mentioned earlier, and some of the way it's allocated makes it even more difficult to evaluate some of the impact. We've had a series of conversations this week focused very much on what are the risks in terms of funding ending, some of which we've mitigated, some of which we've rolled over into new funding, some of which we still have a gap on. So that's part of the evaluation work and the conversations we're having, particularly with Devon County Council over the next few weeks.
Thank you very much. Right, well, we're now going to move on to the next item, which is the committee chair report from the Audit and Risk Committee, and I know that we have an escalation in this area as well, so thank you very much, Graham Clark, for leading.
Thank you. So there are 4 things I'd like to brief the board on. One is something that isn't there, which is the risk piece of it. We made the decision that important though the risk is, we needed to make some progress in terms of board approval of the BAF, which you've seen today. So some of the work that we want to do to take it forward, both within the ICB itself and across the system, we thought we should pause that. So we will pick that up in due course. Second thing to talk about is the anti-fraud work. There was a plan presented to us. There's always the difficulties of measuring the impact of any effort that you put in for anti-fraud, and I won't disclose how much effort does go in. I don't think it should be a matter of public record, but we all know it exists. Measuring how much it prevents is, of course, extremely difficult, so we did have some discussion about the level of effort And we put that in the context that the new services that were being transferred to us have a historic and national picture of being particularly prone to fraud. So we do recognise that there is an NHS anti-fraud group, there's a DHSC one, we commission services as well, and NHS BSA, they process a lot of payments, also have an anti-fraud. So we agreed the plan, but we will revisit it, particularly in terms of how well it's all joined up to identify, recover and prevent fraud. The other two things that are interlinked is that we are now at the close point of the year end financially, and therefore it's time for the annual board accounts to be generated. We were assured around the progress around the narrative, the report, and the work is underway. On the financial side, we recognise that we haven't had an auditor in place. Bill can probably better brief us on exactly where we are on their appointment. But clearly, all firms will have done their audit planning for the public sector already, and therefore there is a significant challenge to the timelines of completing the audit for us. There is a tentative timeline, but I think we all agreed that we would have to watch this space carefully in terms of how that would unfold. The challenge is that we know that NHSE wishes to return to the pre-COVID timelines, and yet we don't have auditors in place. There will actually be two complete separate annual report and accounts. One is the 3-month CCG, and then there'll be the 9-month of the NHS Devon, and that will clearly come in due course to board, but possibly later than one might have wanted. So I'll update as needed. The fourth point, just to table it, is we have seen a draft of the internal audit report. The internal audit work undertaken by Audit South West, ASW, has drafted it based around not only the work they've done, but they also do look at other inputs. So it's not purely which internal audit pieces have we commissioned. I have to say, on the pieces we've commissioned, I think they would probably have come out more positive in their draft opinion than they have. They've actually come out as limited. That might change, but with only a month or so left, I think it's unlikely to. And their dominant logic for only giving us limited assurance is actually around how fast we've been able to put in place a risk management process and a BAF framework. And although they are cognizant that it would be unrealistic for us to have started as an organisation with those already in place, their conclusion is we should have had better pace to get those in place than we have, and on that basis they are likely to give us only limited audit opinion. So at that point I shall open it up for any questions.
Thank you very much, Graham. Bill, did you want to come in at this point?
Only to disappointingly say that we haven't had any further update from external audit. We know that KPMG are doing their internal checks in terms of compliance and independence, but I haven't got an update, and we have been chasing them. So as soon as that is received, I will ensure that the audit committee chair is apprised of that, and also the board in due course.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any comments or questions for Graham? No. Thank you very much. Next we come on to the Primary Care Commissioning Transition Committee and Judy Halgerden.
I think I'll take it as read. The issue we wanted to escalate has already been covered earlier in the agenda.
Thank you. Were there any questions or comments for Judy? No. So we'll come on to the People and Culture Committee and Tandy Harwood.
I think I also take that as read. Some of the issues are reported in the workforce report, unless if there's any questions on that.
No questions, so thank you very much. And now we come on to the Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Board update, and thank you very much, Kate Shields, for joining us today.
I'll take as read the update that's in the paper, but also to reflect that much of the discussion that's generic to ICBs we're having in our own boardroom, and the things that are specific to Devon, I'm sure we will be having those similar sorts of discussions in the future. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Kate. Are there any questions for Kate? No? Thank you. So I think that brings us on next to the action log. Where are we here? If I can just find that on my... Have I? Right. Apologies, I had it turned over. So could I ask colleagues if they're happy to close the items? We have items 28, 29, 30, 31, 32 and 33, which we're requesting to close, and that as detailed on the action log. And then we have two items that remain open. One is the for yourself, Graham. I don't know whether you want to comment on that.
No, that's what I was referring to earlier, actually, in terms of pushing it back to make it align with our governance review.
So we'll keep that one in progress. And then item action 24. I know Darren has been in contact with the person who, Mr. C, who came to speak to the committee before, but we're just now waiting because I had made an offer within the letter to speak to him personally, and but we're just waiting to hear back from him to see whether he wishes to do that. So hopefully be able to close that next month. So thank you very much, colleagues. Right. Oh, Judy.
Can I just be ever so pernickety about one point? I'm not entirely sure that putting something on an action planner is actually closing, or on the forward planner is actually closing the action or confirmation the action has been done. So if we're going to adopt that as a way of doing things, then maybe we ought to be very careful not to then defer things if they were put on the action planner. So I don't know how best to manage that. But technically, the action has not been taken because all we've done is put it on the forward planner, which is great. I'm not, but it's a bit partial and could leave us at risk later on of losing an issue because for some reason the agenda was too busy and the issue got moved or things.
Yeah, thank you, Judy. We can certainly look at that. There's a different way of recording it, and we can make sure that we refer to when the item comes back, then we close the action.
Thank you for that, Judy. So we'll take that as an action that we review the action for the action log. Right, okay, thank you very much. So then we come to questions from members of the public, and as I understand it, we have no questions pre-submitted. If you could confirm that, that would be great. And then we come to any other business. Do any colleagues wish to raise any points? No? So then just to say that our next meeting of the board to be held in public is on the 3rd of May, and that will be at Pomona House in Torquay. So thank you again, colleagues, and for your patience. I know this has been a longer than scheduled board meeting, but we have had some really important discussions, so thank you very much.